Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Review Roundup. My name is Jillian Robinson. I'm the Associate Artistic Producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre. And today I'm joined by one of our co-artistic producers, Ryan Borochovitz. Ryan, how goes it?
It goes, Jill. How are you? How goes
It
with you?
also, yes, it also goes on the end. Lots of moving parts happening. This summer is filled with a ton of projects, a ton of opportunities. So it is certainly going, that is for sure. So this is the Toronto Fringe 2025 Part 2 installment of this review roundup series. So it's featuring Ryan and myself. And how the episode's going to go before we dive into our classic What's in Your Cup icebreaker. Ryan and I have a selection of the shows from the festival that we're going to devote around 10 to 15 minutes to. We're going to unpack, chat. Some of them we both saw, some of them individually we saw. So you're going to get a little taste of sort of like a little duet review or a solo review. That's how this episode will go. We're looking forward to reflecting on our Fringe experience. So, without further ado, Ryan, what are you sipping on today for this episode? What is in your cup?
Yes, I have a nice cup of orange pekoe tea in the cup. Hey,
Yeah.
that's the show. Also, because it is like a million degrees outside, I do
Yes.
have a bottle of water that I might defer to after I finish my tea because this might go a while. How about you, Jill?
Yes.
What's in your cup?
Hydration station. I love that. I have a pink lemonade ginger tea in a Disney cup. Today, I also had a Disney audition, so that was super fun. So I thought I'd just bring that into the recording. Super tasty tea I got going there. And yes, it is, like you said, a million degrees out today. So I have my big goblet of water here that I will definitely be stationing myself throughout the episode. So let's kick it off. The first show that Ryan and I are going to be chatting about, we both had the honor of seeing. This is number one clown comedy with Victor and Priscilla. The company is number one Toronto Fringe clown comedy. So, Ryan, why don't you give us a little synopsis and then the two of us will dive in?
Okay, so appropriately, we are beginning part two of our roundup with the number one clown comedy.
Yeah.
I love the show a lot. Cards on the Table. I thought it was really fun. So this is a clown show, not necessarily a traditional clown show as you kind of like see these things in Fringe, where it's usually like writer performers who master their own clown persona and just get into some kind of like clown shtick or situation here. This is a fully scripted play by a team of three playwrights who have cultivated these characters, our title characters of Victor and Priscilla, over the course of several previous iterations of these characters in previous adventures that have been performed at Alumni Theater as part of one of their new works festivals. I believe that show was Victorian Closet Drama, it was called, and that was the introduction of the characters of Victor and Priscilla. And then they had another show at Theater Gargantua that I think was called Victor and Priscilla Go to the Circus or something to that effect. Apologies, I didn't see either of those, but I did have the pleasure of interviewing our trio of playwrights for the clown article that I wrote for Intermission, the Send in the Clowns for the Fringe. I was very excited after that experience to see what Victor and Priscilla had in store for this
Nice.
third and most robust adventure they've had yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, Victor and Priscilla are clown siblings who are played in drag by a male and female performer, respectively, but in the opposite roles of what
Mm-hmm.
you'd think Victor and Priscilla would be. And they are vaudeville performers that come from this family of entertainers. But Priscilla decides that she wants to not be an entertainer, but to be a proper Victorian lady.
Yes.
So the entire thrust of the drama is essentially, well, how can you be a lady? And then bickering and getting into kind of funny adventures. And their mother enters the scene, as does a variety of cousins, all played by the same performers, cousins
Mm-hmm.
whose last names are all Bunbury. So we get some funny Oscar Wilde hat
Yep.
tips in here. And it's about just going through the throes of, well, what is the way to become a proper gentleman or lady in Victorian society with all of the class and gender implications that those terms carry with them. As far as the short plot summary goes, I think I might want to leave it there. These are
Yeah, totally.
characters who keep coming back in various other iterations. I don't know if this particular number one clown comedy show is going to be revived at any point, but I'm sure we could expect to see shows with the characters of Victor and Priscilla at later dates, and that might riff upon some of these same ideas and jokes. Anything you'd like to add
Yes.
summary wise before we start getting into general appraisal?
No, I think summary wise, you definitely covered the bases there. And just a kind of a general appraisal on my end. I also this was one of my top shows that I saw. I love this type. I love clown. I love vaudeville. I love Oscar Wilde. I love like buffoonery on stage. So this was a beautiful cup of tea of all of that. Yes, tipping my hat to this production as well. So, diving into the creative side of it, I personally went to school with director Kira Keith. Kira was actually at the show I got the opportunity to go to as well. So, it was super neat catching up with her. And again, knowing her flavor of being like a watching her perform and also just knowing her as a person, it was really cool to kind of see that ripple throughout the performance. Like you could tell some of the directive choices were definitely spearhead by her energy and like her comedy rang through. So thank you, Kira, for being a director that kind of put that pizzazz into the piece for sure. And then I also want to just shout out, I think the whole cast was absolutely stellar, but in particular, Eric Emerald, who plays Priscilla, was astonishing. Just the physicality matched with the just connection. So Priscilla does a whole pre-show with the audience prior to the performance, and it was super locked in, and we just set the space up to include everyone. Everyone was already in the round, but we were like absolutely watching this family sort of entertain us in a vaudeville circus tent. Is kind of Eric set the space as Priscilla in that pre-show. Like that was kind of the flavor we were brought into, and again, just the commitment to the genre and the comedy, and there's points in the play where the cousins are coming to knock on the door, and comedy in threes, like each time Priscilla has a meltdown of like, I can't get the door, I'm a lady, and you can't get the door, brother, because you're a lady's brother is a gentleman, and mother, you can't get the, and just like bringing that up and ratcheting that up. And again, comedy in threes. I just think, again, Eric had such a wonderful helm of what this piece was and who this character was. Yeah, before I kind of top it off to you, because I think this element I'm bringing up helped with all the characterization too, is the costuming in this piece was astonishing. Everything with like the mother and the siblings were like hues of red and like vaudevillian like blazers, or like Priscilla's dress was like a little red corset. I think that just kind of fit their family spiel. And then the Bunburys were kind of like a blue hue. And so I just thought that the costuming of this piece was, I wanted to
Costumes were designed by Nina Kay, who
definitely
was one of
Nina
the
Kay.
who was one of the three writers as well.
Yes, cool. So Nina, yes, tipping the hat there as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan, what
Yeah.
do you want to
While you
contribute?
were already on the topic of the cast, man, the whole cast is really good. Yes, Eric obviously is a standout, and that pre-show sequence is just so
Yeah.
funny and such great improv chops while still committing so wholeheartedly to the character. But so much of the nature of clown is riffing spontaneously off of the energy that the audience gives you, which I was
Mhm.
worried because I knew this show is written and kind of locked in that way by the writing team and that the actors aren't part of that writing team. I was worried that there would be a lack of spontaneity to it, that it would just be like, yep, here's the show. But that pre-show in particular really did sell that, yes, this is still a clown show as you might traditionally expect it. To finish the titular duo, Julie Vanderlip plays Victor, the brother. And yeah, such a funny character. Also, less showy than
Mhm.
Priscilla, but I still think like just the way she's mastered this character as well, and the properness and the funny diction and the kind of old-timey Victorian slang insults were very fun. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just like this is so good there. We have the mother character played by Michelle Graham, who she's so
Mhm.
funny, and she has her catchphrase. What did she say? The mother always knows,
Mother
or
always knows, or mother knows
yeah,
best, or something. Yeah,
yeah,
something like that.
but yeah, just like that. It was another thing that kept snowballing into the joke got funnier each time that it was repeated.
Mhm.
And that big shout out to Parker Elizabeth Rodenberg, who played all three of the Bunburys. They were Bo Bunbury, who is the dandy, Basher
Mhm.
Bunbury, the pugilist, and Aunt Nell Bunbury, who only speaks in Polari. And
Yeah.
Polari and pugilist slang and Victorian slang are all things that are very important to what this particular show is. Polari, in
Mhm.
particular, for those who aren't familiar, is a form of Victorian theatrical slang that specifically during the Victorian era was used by queer communities as a way of letting queer people communicate with each other on the sly without being understood by straight, rigid, heteronormative society, without
Yep.
knowing what they were saying to each other. And it was a good way, an anti-language, as it has been described to me by the writers of the show when I interviewed them, because it's meant to
Hmm.
not be understood by some people, but understood by others. So
Yeah.
when we finally have this third Bunbury cousin, Aunt Nell, who's the most accomplished of their theatrical slang and only speaks in this language, there it's very funny to have the way that
Yeah.
this language is used actually kind of like teaches you something about this
Yeah.
particular element of history. And even while it's still so fantabuloso, and I forget all the words, there was, I think, there's a glossary in the program here that
Yeah.
explains some of the words here, although trying to follow along while they're having these conversations is a fool's errand. But I
Yeah.
thought it was very fun. So yeah, just the whole cast, huge shout out. All of them did so, and
Hmm.
like lots of dense, tricky language to chew on that they performed excellently. And so obviously so well written in that regard.
Absolutely. I would love for this to get housed elsewhere in the city and have more folks come and see
Yeah.
and laugh.
And more shows with
Um,
these characters because they've been
mhm.
proven as this track record. And something that also that was discussed in that interview, which didn't make it into the final article, is like how much is the audience expected to like know these characters and follow their journey throughout. And one of the things that Natalie Kay, one of the other writers, said to me was that, well, like, there's lore across all of these installments, but it's not lore you need to know. Like when you think about like a Mr. Bean sketch, sure, maybe there's Mr. Bean lore, but like it's really just like an isolated incident that you don't need to come knowing. But I'm sure there are
Yeah.
like little Easter eggs that fans who do keep following them along this journey will appreciate. I think there is, even if this is a different type of clown show, there's a tradition certainly in Toronto theater, but kind of all kinds of different theater communities of recurring clown acts and characters. Morrow and Jasp come to mind, Mump and
Yep.
Smoot, Poxy, Karen Hines' clown character who recently just made a
Hmm.
comeback, and hopefully the Monks, who we saw last year, will
Love
make
it.
more Monks shows for us to enjoy. So I welcome Victor and Priscilla into the pantheon of recurring clown acts, and I
Yes.
look forward to their next hilarious adventure.
Okay, great. Moving on to show number two, which isn't called number two, even though the first one was called number one. This is Sweet and Sultry Burlesque by S&S Productions. So fun. This is a show that just I saw. So Joshua Benici and Morgan Joy, I've seen a lot of their burlesque shows at Sweet Action Theater. And so obviously I had to see the show was like on the top of my list to see. I'm pretty sure their entire run was sold out. You can totally tell why. It was an absolute joy. Essentially, this piece was just like a burlesque variety show, mapped out 5 to 6 acts of burlesque performers. And essentially, it was just that. There was an MC that kind of took us along. There were two kittens, which kittens, for any folks who haven't seen burlesque, they are performers that are responsible to clear the stage and set up the stage. So essentially, they're stage hands, but they're sexy and cute and weird about it.
Are they dressed like
And
cats?
nope, no, they're
No?
just called kittens and they're usually shamed and like shoot off the stage. So the kittens in this were hilarious. I'll go into a little bit about the different installments that were included. Shout out. So Ava Val. Ava Val is the host, is the MC that brings us through. And Ava has hosted other Sweet and Sultry burlesque shows. Super phenomenal human being, stand-up comedian as well. And they got in on all of the action. Everyone's in costume, so I'm actually not going to name people that
Yeah.
maybe are or aren't who they are.
Masters of
um,
disguise.
but they were hilarious. They had like trays of candy that they were like offering people just to like weirdly offer prior to the show. And they gave consent bands, like these like neon bands to wear around your neck. So basically, in burlesque shows, if you have like a lei or a band around your neck or whatever, you're allowing performers to interact with you if you'd like. So I took one of those. I took my candy. I was front row. I was so in on it. The kittens were phenomenal. They had this whole bit of they wanted to dance, but like there wasn't time. And Ava kept being like, no, stop being sexy or stop doing all these things. So that was a cool little like B track to the A track performers. So I'll just talk a little bit about each one that I saw. All were phenomenal across the board. The first one was like your standard burlesque strip tease. It was to like an 80s power ballad. The performer was kind of dressed in like this biker attire. And as the song progressed, each article of clothing came off to the point where we were left with like nipple tassels and undergarments, and that's all. It was like very like 80s grunge, like everyone was hooting and hollering. So it was a really lovely sort of intro into the piece. I do remember that being the first one, but I might go all over about the other ones.
Sure.
So one of them was Josh came in as Mr. Clean to like clean up the candy off the stage, and it was very like kind of like calm, clean music, and then the track would skip to like a sexy, like grungier, and so he would like take off his shirt or like take off the big eyebrows of Mr.
So
Clean or
clarify,
whatever, and then
Mr.
go
Clean,
back
the
to
brand mascot, was what
yes,
he
the
was.
brand
Okay,
mascot.
just
Yes, yes.
checking.
So that was a very cool like playing around of like actually cleaning and then like ripping off and becoming like yeah. And it's funny because I feel like everyone has like Mr. Clean's kind of like sexy, right? So it was like a cool little like
To each their own.
iteration. And while we're on the topic of Josh, there was another installment which you would have loved. It was called Jurassic Pants. And it
Okay.
was Josh and another performer, and they came on in just like a Speedo. And the whole thing is like the Jurassic or like the like dun, 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 that music as
Wait,
they're trying to put
is
on.
that Jurassic Park or is that Thus
I
Spoke
don't
Zarathustra from like 2001: A
yeah,
Space
it's not,
Odyssey?
but it's Jurassic Pants is what it's called. But
Okay.
I'm saying like they came on as T-Rex, like they came
Okay,
on as
gotcha.
dinosaurs, and then they spent the whole installment putting on pants without their hands,
Because their arms
just
are so
using their
small.
feet and kicking like the pants on, and they both got their pants up without using hands. It was like because that's another iteration of burlesque too. It doesn't always have to be taking off clothes, it can be putting on clothes. So that was like a really
Anti-burlesque.
cool, yeah. Then there was another performer who came in with a box of pizzas and then proceeded to, there was 4 pizzas, take out like a felt pizza on like a wooden dish and like spin, like plate spin basically on her fingers and on her toes. And she was a gymnast, she was an acrobat. And then she decided to like take off her clothes after that. And it was just like each installment was a show in its own. It
Okay.
was like so phenomenal. Yeah, she was really good. And then okay, this is one where I helped I did audience participation for. A performer came out, a Good Life bag, and an exercise ball. And the whole act was them taking out a different type of pump, air pump, to try to pump up this ball. And he was like playing with the whole of the ball, like it was like genitals, basically. And then having audience members like try to like help pump up the ball. And then he like humped the ball, and it was just this whole interaction with like Jim bro and a ball. Anyways, this is just like a flavor and a taste of all the different installments that I saw. It was a raucous night. The entire audience was hooting and hollering. Everyone left the space being like, that was so fun, that was so sexy, like. And I just personally, I love going to burlesque because it reminds me of like going to like a speakeasy or going to like just something where it's going to be like taboo, and you actually being in the audience is a performance of itself because you can feel everyone around you like releasing their inhibitions, and like you kind of get a little tidbit or taste of like people's with the mask, like people with the mask off. Like the girl I was sitting next to, we talked about when we were like, I was doing the air pump for the exercise ball or something. I made like a little like sexual joke or something. And she instantly was like, I'm so and it's just, I don't know. I feel like sitting in the audience for burlesque is like very different than like your movie audience, your theater audience, your musical theater audience. Like everyone kind of, like I said, the mask is off, they're releasing their inhibitions, and it's like you're watching like a cockfight, like no pun intended, I guess. It was in the HGP Playhouse venue, got patrons pick. So congrats on that. Well deserved. And like I said, Sweet and Sultry, they do it acts all the time at Sweet Action Theater. Everyone should go out and just like have a night. And it's a very inclusive community as well. I recognize some of the performers too that were on stage. And obviously, like I said, I mentioned Josh and Morgan. They brought back Dolly I don't remember the exact character's name, but basically it's this felt doll that performers in like black morph suits like operate the doll, and the doll strips
Oh,
and actually has a talking vagina. It's hilarious. It's amazing. And it's puppetry. So every installment had like a different genre alongside the burlesque. And that's Sweet and Sultry always kind of does that with their shows. So again, it's like micro shows in the one big giant show. Candy was had, sex was chatted about, laughter was filling the space. Tipping the hat to Sweet and Sultry.
nice.
I think where we can leave that, because like I said, Sweet and Sultry, they always do shows at Sweet Action, so keep your eyes peeled.
And
um
didn't the same team have another Fringe show that was at Sweet Action? Like, and basically, I don't know
yes,
if it was exactly identical, all the same people, but certainly a lot of overlap between them.
yeah, and I don't think any of the three of us saw like are going to
No,
be
no, it's
covering
not
that
on the
show,
docket.
unfortunately. But also the show was brought to Ottawa Fringe and also Orlando, I believe, too, so it's got some touring under its belt, and like I said, well deserved. Yeah. Cool.
Wonderful.
Moving on. The next show we're going to be chatting about is Sex Goddess, and the company for that is House Plus Body. And Ryan, you saw this one, so let us know all about it.
Yes, Sex Goddess. This is one of my favorite things I saw all Fringe, just cards on the table. I thought this was incredible. And I knew so little about this going in. The only reason why I was actually like gravitated towards seeing it is because House and Body Theater, you, Jill, certainly might recall, and other people listening to this might, earlier this year, they did Measure for Measure, the production that was at Crow's Theater in the studio space. And that was fantastic. Like one of the best Shakespeare productions I have seen in Canada in recent memory, if I'm being completely honest. So I'm just like, wow, yeah, I don't know what Sex Goddess is, but this company has piqued my interest. I will check out whatever they do moving forward. And boy, am I glad I did, because Sex Goddess was amazing.
Nice.
So this is a solo show created by Riel Reddick Stevens. She wrote and performed it herself, and she plays a character named Reina, who is decidedly not herself, but Reina is a pop star who has just released a new album titled Sex Goddess. And the beginning of the show is framed as we are the audience who has arrived at the listening party for the new release of this album. But then, as she's kind of like greeting us and bringing us into the party, it becomes clear that she's going to tell us this complicated story of how this album came into existence. And most of the narrative that follows is her telling that story and embodying the moments in it and embodying the plethora of other side characters. And right off the bat, just whoa, the way that she embodies these characters and does their voices and inflections, their personalities. Chef's kiss. It is
Nice.
stunning. Reminds me of last year at Fringe, we talked about Crosstown on a Rajarom's solo show where he did something very similar with all the kind of variety of characters, like as good quality as that. Really, yeah, he might come up again later in this conversation. As she's going through this story about the listening party, one, this show will be actually making later appearances. It's going to probably like concurrent with when we release this. It's going to be playing at Hamilton Fringe, and I think it's even also going to Summer Works after that. So there will be ample
Cool.
opportunities to see this. So I don't want to spoil the specifics of the
Mm-hmm.
story. But as she's telling us this story, the kind of recurring motif is that she is presenting her art in a way that frames her as a sexually liberated woman. And so much of every encounter she has is constantly impinging upon or giving a disagreeable response to that in some way. Basically, every man that she encounters over the course of this journey expects something from her, often of a sexual nature, and often in response to the explicitly sexual lyrics of her song, where she's trying to reclaim her sexuality. Men hear that and see it as an invitation. And on the other end of the gendered spectrum, women, and particularly a white woman record producer who she's trying to get the attention of so that she can make this album, who professes herself to be a strong feminist ally, is hearing these lyrics and not recognizing them as the self-liberating potential of what these sexual lyrics mean, but sees them as being misogynistic and anti-woman and not having respect for yourself or for women. But this character is like so ridiculous and so over the top that we, the audience, recognize that like she's missing the point and she's trying very hard to like say all the right things and but she keeps like slipping in these racialized microaggressions throughout and like catching herself and being embarrassed, but then like not actually like doubling back. It's like the performance that Riel gives throughout all of these characters is just astonishingly wonderful. And throughout this adventure, she also sings various songs from the album as you kind of like think about this story in relation to how it inspired various episodes in this story inspired the writing of a specific song and that so the songs are pretty well written. I have do I have here who wrote the songs, because I don't know if they were all by her. The composer is Ghost Boy RJ. I hope I'm
Mm.
pronouncing that name right, but yeah, the songs are all really well written. They all sort of like fit the beats of the story where they appear very well. But yeah, like it's her performance that really just sells everything so well. The dramaturg and artistic support, not necessarily director here, is Christopher Manousos, who is the artistic director of House and Body Theatre. And if you remember, Jill, that Measure for Measure had very specific like lighting design that like
Yes.
created this high contrast. I don't see a lighting designer credited here, and apologies if there is one that I'm missing. But this show also, from that sort of like visual level, less high contrast switching between like solid colors in the way that show was, but a very harsh yet soft pink glow over
Cool.
top everything that like really created the visual palette for the story we're going on and didn't change throughout. It just kind of really did set the scene. And the fact that it didn't even change much or at all between like the present we're at the party hearing the story and the going back into the adventure, it didn't need it. It's sort of like it blends these two things together. There is kind of no visual differentiation between past and present. Something else I really want to mention, and yet I don't see a sound designer credited here, but maybe Ghost Boy RJ as the composer is also credited in this, or whoever. But there was a lot of like fun whoosh sound effects and like
Mm.
video game like coin grab sound effects, and it makes you kind of realize I don't think I would have pieced this together while I was watching it without this, but so much of the narrative trajectory, this increasingly absurd narrative trajectory that she goes on that very quickly breaks realism and then just keeps breaking it even further, is kind of operating on video game logic of her like arriving at checkpoints, accomplishing tasks,
Cool.
encountering obstacles, and this little flourish in the sound design really does put that idea in your head as you're kind of watching this journey. And because there tends to be, I think, gendered lines in terms of how we think of like video game, especially like that kind of like arcade era stuff. That's like
Mhm.
the vintage. You tends to see that as like, oh yeah, this is like a boy thing, boys adventure. Like having this like explicitly feminist story told in this way, like breaks that whole kind of arbitrary distinction apart in a lot of interesting ways. There is one character, again, she plays all of them herself, but one character named Star who becomes her just BFF, even though they just meet like for the first time in this, and it's just like is the coolest person ever. Who, again, I don't want to spoil too much about that, even though I really do want to spoil a lot about it, but because I do hope people do get to see this in its later instantiations. But yeah, if you see this show, you're gonna fall in love with Star. Star is the coolest.
Nice.
Yeah, I get it.
Star's a star.
Star is a star, and Riel is a star who plays Star and plays every other character. And yeah, I was so invested in Reina's journey. Every time a new obstacle came, like, no, but then something really cool happens. Star often intervenes in very clever and creative and once again, very non-realistic ways that really just, yeah, this is such a fun, bizarre, quirky, eclectic, but very hearted like or just it has such a big beating heart underneath all of this that asks thought-provoking questions about female agency and autonomy in the music industry, but also just is having a fun time from beginning to end, filled with bopping musical numbers and just like the weirdest video game logic, point A to point B adventure that you could possibly imagine. None of these things sound like they should go together, and yet they all do so perfectly. This is
Nice.
one of the best things I saw at Fringe this year. It is a kind of perfect work of art, a total work of art, if you will. And I strongly encourage people to see this wherever they can. And I hope it keeps coming back for as long as it takes for everybody to get a chance to encounter it.
Wow.
Yeah, high praise.
Rave reviews.
I love this so
Okay.
much. Yeah.
Listen, I think I'll use this kind of segue here. This is a solo show at Fringe. We're going to be talking about another solo show down the way. And the solo shows this year were pretty phenomenal. So that's what I love about Fringe as well. Like it's a platform for solo shows to absolutely live and breathe and get on its feet, and just tipping the hat to all the solo performers who went out and did the thing this year.
Speaking of which, the next one is also a solo show.
Indeed. This is Have Fun Kids by Convection Productions. And Ryan and I both saw this one, so we'll both be chatting about it. Ryan, why don't you give us a little bit of a framework and then we'll dive in.
Okay, so this is a solo show written and performed by Laura Ann Harris. What it essentially is this is a kind of performance grieving ritual, processing her grief for the loss of her dear friend Jordan, who was a performer and a playwright and kind of like a subversive performance artist who sadly lost his life to suicide. There's kind of a lot of interesting things that this piece is doing. On one hand, it is telling the story of that very awful night when Laura and a lot of Jordan's other friends and loved ones kind of all slowly began to become aware and started informing each other, mostly hoping that someone would check up on him to try to figure out, is he okay? We haven't heard from him in a while. Things are starting to seem like they might not be okay. And we, the audience, because we already know where this is heading, can feel that sort of dread of where this is heading in this broken up narrative of that very horrible night. But in so doing it, that portion of the narrative is also about the community of people who are brought together by their love for this one person and the loss they felt and came together in that moment trying to stop something that was already too late from being prevented. On the other end of the story, because Jordan was this very prolific artist who wrote constantly, Laura was left with these over 700 pages of his writing, some of which are things that he'd already like performed, other things are things that he started and never finished, but just like so much material. This remains of his creative output and all the potential thereof that in his absence will probably never see the light of day outside of the context of a show like this, where Laura, as this dutiful friend and like loving collaborator of the dead, is able to share versions or parts of his stuff. And so throughout the show, on various like projector screens and in these kind of announcements that happen over the intercom, we hear portions of Jordan's writing being read by these various voices who, over the course of it, we don't know who's necessarily reading this. If you don't know Jordan, you could be like, oh, well, maybe some of that is his voice, and we don't know where these voices are coming from. I don't know if we even should spoil where those voices are coming from. I don't know what the afterlife of this piece necessarily is. It feels very much, even though Laura herself, I think, comes from or is from Toronto originally, but is currently living somewhere in the States. This show really feels like it belongs in a Toronto Fringe context because that's the community that Jordan was working in and came from. So like I don't know how well this show would work in a different context.
Yeah.
With that in mind, I'll kind of spoil the voices we hear are the people from that other story about that night, like the artistic and community of loved ones who all cared about this person, who now all get to play a small part in
Yeah.
sharing his art and his legacy with an audience, with the world. And then the third kind of interesting piece of this, and all of these are sort of interspersed with each other as we go, is that prior to the show, the team goes through the lobby with a big box of these interesting little trinkets, and they ask people who are about to go into the show, would you like to pick one of the trinkets for this show? And people in the lobby will pick one. It's kind of just random who they decide to come up to, and then it becomes random of which ones they take. And those items are then put into a box, and those people in the lobby are asked to record a line about the title of whatever story is linked to that object. So then at various points during the performance, Laura goes up to these four closed wooden boxes, pulls out the item. We hear the recording of that audience member saying, tell the story about this, or I forget exactly what the precise phrasing was. And then she puts down that object and tells a specific story, a narrative memory about Jordan and their relationship that is tied to whatever that object is. So every show will be different depending on
Mhm.
which four items are put in those boxes. And we've seen different versions of this, certainly in Toronto. I don't think I am the first person or the most clever person for bringing up that. We've had Haley McGee's Ages of Feeling, that was also at Soul Pepper last year, which used a very similar premise of letting the audience choose stories from these
Mm.
envelopes. And for every one that you hear, there's ones that you don't. So you can never encapsulate the entire complexity of a human life in this
Mhm.
performance. And this show is very much the same way, but whereas that's a narrator telling the story of presumably their life, this is a we have so many memories of my relationship to Jordan. You can hear some of them, but you can't get all of them into a show like this. And I think it's a very good dramaturgical way of realizing that. We also have the show Iris Says Goodbye at this particular Fringe Festival, also presented at Soul Pepper. Soul Pepper is the home of variable life stories, it seems,
Mhm.
where Iris Says Goodbye is different because we talked about it at length in part one of this roundup. Check that out if you missed it. But that one used a similar audience chosen variability conceit, but specifically to present different multiversal potential future lives that the main character could get reincarnated into. But it was still the idea that you'll get to see and hear some of them, but not others, depending on which show you attend. So
Yes.
there is a trend happening here that this show is very much playing with. Sorry, I've been talking a lot as I've been
No, that's good.
spinning all of these other thoughts off of the summary. Anything you'd like to add generally before we get into
Well, no,
appraises?
I appreciate you giving the synopsis and then also that framework because I actually had to run into this and sit in
Mm,
the audience last minute. So I actually didn't get to experience the lobby trinket
right.
sharing. So I remember you and I chatted a little bit about this show prior to this roundup, and I didn't even know that that was the
Different every
setup
show.
and it
Yeah.
was different every show.
Hmm.
So having not known that and just sort of seeing Laura sort of take out all of these trinkets and then go into a specific story of each, it was still phenomenally, I was entranced. I guess want to just take this opportunity to like Laura as performer and storyteller. You could hear a pin drop the entire performance. She was extremely captivating and just some performers have a really good way of, this is going to sound like weird, but not only chewing on the text, but like literally making text seem syrupy.
Hmm.
And by that, I mean, it's just like the tone of voice matched with how you're telling the story, matched with how you're rounding the sounds of the words you're saying. It's like a perfect recipe. It's hard to explain, but I just found she was definitely one of those performers.
Yeah. There's like a
Um,
kindness to her,
yeah,
a
there's definitely
gentleness.
it's a gentle, it's a genuine, it's an authenticity. Also, just knowing how close Laura was with Jordan and doing this sort of being the pillar or the vessel that sort of carries on his legacy through this piece, like his heartbeat was felt through her the entire time. And then just as the story itself, as the framing itself unravels near the end, and Laura completely sort of opens up, and it is that authentic, genuine emotion
Mhm.
and transcends art a bit. It kind of brings us into the personal side of it, which art can be a wonderful sort of safe haven to do that. And you could feel that in the audience, sort of that switch and that flip. And to the point where even at the end of curtain call, bringing, the folks that worked on the piece and were also close with Jordan, bringing them up on stage. And Jordan's sister, I believe, was in the
Mhm.
audience with mine as well, kind of taking us from literally breaking the fourth wall and
Yeah.
making the story in like visibly autobiographical.
Could I comment
Just
on that? Sorry,
yeah, please,
were you in the
please.
middle of a
I was
thought
just
there?
gonna say, just like the audience, like could feel that too, even like to the point where Laura said, if folks want to hang back and sort of give yourself a bit of
Mhm.
time,
Yeah.
because the stories were like lovely and again like packed with like the audio clippings and the little seeing how the little trinkets were made and everything, but then hearing what the stories were telling and going on this journey, it was one of those pieces where it really was like a rippling, like a build up effect. So I did take a couple moments sitting in my chair just to kind of be like, woof, right. I was so into the storytelling of it that I kind of forgot that it was real for a moment.
Hmm.
So that was like jarring, not in a bad way, but just in like I'm going to take some sort of audience care before I leave the space. But going back, you said you wanted to touch on something
Yeah,
I said.
well, just something like you talked about, like the transcending the art of itself and the that literal breaking of the fourth wall. Not that there was ever much of a fourth wall, because it's always been just like narrated directly to us, the
Yeah.
real audience in real time, with Laura herself as the real
Yeah.
performer. But there's even just like weird little ways that like this show broke the frame in like a good way of like just silly little example, but I wrote it here in my notebook, is that she begins plugging the other fringe shows. You know how like fringe shows often like start saying like, after curtain call, it's like, thank you for seeing our show. Here, I'm going to name some fringe shows by like friends of mine that I think you should also see. She
Mm-hmm.
did a version of that where she started just like naming other shows you should go see, but like the show wasn't over yet. And the she didn't wait till like a curtain call moment for like that is built into the show proper, not
Yeah.
just like a little post-show ritual where Fringe is a
Mm-hmm.
community environment
Mm-hmm.
that supports each other. And I think like why that might feel like a weird thing to harp on, but I think it's like it's collapsing the frame of like what is the performance, what is life. At it's not that threshold of the erosion of the semiotic distance of now we're back as ourselves. Like, no, it's just like if you have fringe shows you want to shout out, you just do it here. It's like it was
Yeah.
still like done in like an appropriate place. It wasn't like she just randomly interrupted one of the memories for that. But yeah, it was like little things like that. I wrote down a few of them. I'll probably struggle to
Well,
like
I
fun.
just to
Yeah,
speak
please.
on that too, I think it does a wonderful job of playing to what this piece, like I said, the heartbeat of this piece is of like shouting out and supporting the artists. Again, yeah, it's like a layered iteration there of like not only is Laura paying homage to her friend who also was, created so many stories and had a platform to support others, she's using the festival, weaving that into supporting. Yeah. Cause at the end of the day, one of the messages taking home is like, to me, it was like the classic suicide message of like making sure you're checking on your loved ones and what have you. And not to say that the folks around Jordan weren't, but just I think in an arts community, like on paper, it seems like, oh, you wouldn't have to as much, but I actually argue, and I think this piece does a good job of like, we actually probably should even more.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so, yeah,
and like so much of the story is like they were indeed checking in on Jordan.
yeah,
Like that's what so much of that thrust is. But just as much as there is that community of people who cared about him throughout his life, came together in that moment,
mm-hmm.
the fact that all of them come together to make this living tribute,
Yeah,
that like it collapses the idea of what a solo show is, because it's not just Laura telling her story,
mm-hmm.
it's her bringing all of these people who are characters in the story but then become
Yeah,
co-creators of this experience. The fact that as writer here, like on the Fringe website, is co-credited with Laura and Jordan are the writers of this piece,
yeah,
because so much of what we hear in this piece are things that Jordan
yeah.
wrote. Also,
Whew.
shout out to director Jesse Frazier, who we haven't mentioned yet, but obviously very strong directorial stamp on this piece to have all these threads come together. We also didn't mention that this is one of the shows in the Next Stage series this year, but yes,
Yes,
that we're making a point of covering all four of those over these roundup. But like, yeah, this is the next level type of
yeah.
fringe solo show that like, yeah, was just so touching. I was like so misty in the eyes by the end of it.
I'm
Yeah.
misty right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm because I'm just thinking of like I want to call this like a thud moment, and why I
But
say that it's when Laura grabs all of the stacks of papers and just like places it on the stool and then says like this is like the 700 pages of Jordan's work,
mhm.
and like just to have that sort of symbolic like image of like his story sort of packaged up and like twined center stage, and then she's orated so much of it, but just to kind of again talk about like a legacy, like to see the text like center stage, it's almost to me was almost like an urn of ashes a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like it's being it's like there's humans and then there's artists that are also humans, but like artists, humans will have their story of life, but artists like they have their stories of life, but they've also had a life full of stories or have written stories alongside their own life. So there very much is this like actual package of like life that they've created.
It's funny, like this didn't even occur to me like at all watching the show, but you sort of like bringing this up now. Those 700 pages neatly tied up with a bow is so kind of the opposite of what this show is because it doesn't tie it up with a bow. It sort of presents it not just like in like the messy plethora of unbridled artistic output that it was, but even like specifically the fact that the memories are each linked to specific items and that you can't get the entirety of the story, that we obviously don't hear all 700 pages of this work over the course of this piece. It's an interesting contrast of like that visual of here is the work contained, confined package when so much of the performance is spent exploding that package, not in like
Yeah.
a physically literal sense before us, but that's the narrative undercurrent of what so much of this piece is doing.
And I think it kind of, this may get heavy, but like both exist in like the mind of an artist, especially, but also probably in Jordan's mind of like having all of these stories and presenting them, but then also having them packaged up and having them sort of in like a structured container. I feel like it again, like both what you just brought up, the messiness, but yet tied up in a bow, like those are kind of like the pendulum of being an artist. And then especially an artist who's struggling with suicide as well, like thoughts cascading on both sides of that. It just kind of has you look at it differently, right? A little bit. Oh, this piece, yeah. As we're talking about it too, it's beautiful. It's heavy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep touring this though. Like this is definitely a show that a lot of folks need to see, especially in the arts community, but just like as a whole. There was also such like a inner childness to some of the stories as well, like at least the trinkets that were pulled from mine. So peppering that in with the heavy content really made for a very rounded experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Mhm.
Our next piece we're going to be talking about is Siranoush, and the production company for that is Corp Oluz Theatre. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing. Ryan, you saw this one. You were the only one of the trio to see it. So, yeah, let us know a little bit about it and go ahead.
Okay, so riffing off of Have Fun Kids, this is the fourth and final one of the Next Stage series that we are covering. We covered the first two in part one, and now we are rounding it out here. So, Siranoush is the name of a 19th century Armenian actress who defied stereotypes and played a plethora of roles, including Hamlet, and was very much like an icon of the theater of her time and place in 19th century Armenia. But we are introduced to Siranoush through our writer performer. This is another solo show who is Lara Arabian, a contemporary Armenian Canadian actress who's been making a lot of her career playing various types of terrorists in like TV shows and movies because that's the kind of role that unfortunately an Armenian actress is able to get, even though she's not herself Arabic or from whatever part of the world is being represented in these pieces. It is unfortunately the box that she's had to find herself in. So, over the course of this solo show, she's describing her own relationship to her culture and to the homeland. She goes on a pilgrimage, so to speak, to Armenia to connect with her roots and finds herself very out of sorts there. This kind of often recurring question that comes up in these types of solo shows about diaspora and one's relationship to the homeland of why do I feel like such a foreigner when I'm supposed to be coming home, and how do I make sense of who I am when I am not quite fully Canadian in the eyes of most, but not able to connect with these fully Armenian roots, even though that's who I thought I was in contrast to that. And then over the course of that journey, she discovers Siranoush. And this becomes this icon, this role model, somebody who she connects her own identity to as not just a pioneering figure from Armenian culture, but specifically an actress, someone like her, someone who defied norms, didn't let herself get boxed into certain ways.
Mhm.
And that's, yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically what this performance is. So she kind of like goes back and forth between her own personal journey and then sort of reenacts or explains parts of Siranoush's life, and we kind of see the relationship between the two as it goes on. And there's like a lot of really great material, very lyrical writing, sometimes very funny stuff, things that I imagine people within the Armenian diaspora themselves probably get like a kick out of even more so, like things kind of like riffing on elements of the culture, in particular, things that I would admit that I was a bit of at an arm's length of trying to like fully grapple with. But yeah, there's like a lot of really interesting stuff here. I'm trying to like flip through my notes to see if there's like anything in particular. Lots of like really like cool images, like of flowers sort of being scattered along the stage and kind of how
Mm.
that stuff like just kind of like very like striking imagery in that way. There was like this little sort of doll that she kind of often did like live stream reenactments of things, or various dolls that kind of got projected onto the stage, and that was like a way of sort of expanding the dialogue elements and some of like the history versus the present in here, similar to what another next stage show that we talked about in the previous episode, Songs by a Wannabe, did with various Barbie doll versions of the Spice Girls. That's just like
Nice.
a
Yeah.
funny random connection that I only really thought of now because, oh, right, those were both part of the next stage series. Kind of talks about like previous things, like elements of her own past, her family, when she lived in Ottawa as a child with her family, that they would throw eggs at the Turkish embassy. Like, I don't know, I'm just kind of just like, these were some of the things that like stood out to me
Yeah.
writing it out here. But then it's sort of like kind of spoilers, I guess, but it sort of does culminate in this performance of the to be or not to be monologue from Hamlet that was performed in Armenian as Siranoush herself would have presumably done it. But it blurs the line of like, is this Lara or is this Siranoush? Because over the course of the story, we've sort of been weaving between the two. It reminds me an awful lot of Playing Shylock, the Saul
Okay.
Rubinek show that was at Can Stage earlier this year, because that culminated in a Yiddish language version of Shylock's Hath Not a Jew Eyes monologue. So there's like a an interesting, I guess, yeah, so many parallels to other shows that this one provoked for me, but thinking about how one filters one's language through culture, but also using Shakespeare, this like inherently colonial art form that has this sort of international purchase in whatever context you find it, and that it can be reclaimed by doing it in one's own language. And yeah, it's there's like a lot of really interesting stuff here. I will admit, if it seems like I'm a little sloppier in my description of this than I have been with some of the other ones, is that I saw the show at the end of a four-show day, and I definitely didn't fall asleep. I promise you that, but
Yeah.
I was losing energy as we went through it. And I don't think that's like a fault, certainly not a fault of the show.
Hmm.
But yeah, I was, as I'm trying to like follow the complex weaving of these blurred stories, at times it was a lot easier to pick out like striking images more so than it was to get like the full sweep of the texture of the entire piece. But I think this was
Right.
strong. Like, you know, Lara herself is a very charismatic performer as she plays both a version of herself and Siranoush. There's like a lot of really like strong, interesting things here. And was this directed by Adam Agoyan? Is that what I'm reading right here? No. Okay.
No, Carla Mello.
Carla Mello. What does it say? Oh no, there's a pull quote from Adam Agoyan praising it. So good. You know, who needs my review when you have something like that backing up? But yes,
Nice.
yeah, the director and co-creator was Carla Mello. So like, yeah, a lot of really good stuff here. I don't know, anything I say sort of like strike anything to you? You want to ask about it that maybe I could like answer better, or do you just feel like we could move on to the next
No,
one?
I feel like we could move on. Like again, so this is another solo piece as
Yeah,
well, right? And yeah, like I've said, the solo pieces have donned the stage of Toronto Fringe 2025.
strong year for them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely strong. I love when we do these too, because obviously there's only three of us, and this Fringe this year was massive, so many shows. So when we do these little roundups, I get to hear of the shows I didn't get to see. So this is one that unfortunately I didn't get a chance to see. I probably would have loved to see it, but thank you for doing due diligence in this episode so that I could come on the journey with you.
Happy to help.
Moving on to our next production we're going to chat about is Very Shady Arab Ladies, and the production company is FAOC. And Ryan, you were the one of us that saw this, so go ahead and talk about Very Shady Arab Ladies.
Okay, so this I kind of want to call it a clown show. I don't feel like it was marketed as one, but like that's kind of the vibe we're going here. So it is a surprisingly large cast, but for the most part, it is a duo of performers who created the piece, Rula Saeed and Mariam Toller. And they are exactly what the title says. They are two very shady Arab ladies. And the thrust of the plot is that they own or are operating this family shawarma shop that was originally called Shawarma Queen, but then due to some sort of kerfuffles got renamed to Shawarma King, and now they're about to take possession of it again and are going to rename it back to Shawarma Queen because the two ladies running it have that queen-like energy and how they run their shawarma. But then wouldn't you know it that due to some, again, kerfuffles and legalism and contracts, their uncle Samir, who has control over it and promised it to them, winds up giving it to this other character, Narendra. I forget what his relationship to them was, if he's like their cousin or their brother, but either way, he's a jerk. We don't like him. He is
Okay.
played by the always entertaining HRH Anand Rajaram. I told you he would come back in
Mhm.
this episode, and he's probably going to come back again in part three because he's been very busy this Fringe season.
Yes.
He's also credited as a co-creator and even director of this show, and he plays a variety of clownish characters. And as we know, he is somebody who's able to weave between these characters with very effortless manner. So yeah, so this Narendra character who's just like a big jerk and he's gonna take control of the shawarma shop as like the villain in this way. He's not even gonna keep it as Shawarma King. He wants to rename it to Shawarma Hour. What time is it? It's Shawarma Hour. But in all this material that he printed for this new rebranding, he spelled it wrong, so now it says Shawarma Whore. So,
Nice.
so, so good job there. So basically, the adventure that our two titular characters need to go on is to just find their Uncle Samir, who clearly just made some sort of error, so that they can retake possession of the shawarma shop. So they're going to go on this adventure to find the very difficult to find uncle. But meanwhile, there's been a threat of a terrorist attack of a group of terrorist cells hiding in underground tunnels underneath the city of Toronto, where this is set. And so, as our ladies go on this adventure, two cops show up. The cops are, do I have their names here? So they are actually the two musicians who play the pre-show music, and they don't like dress up like cops at all. They're like keep their like bass guitar and saxophone the whole time and look super groovy. But they're kind of, I think, technically undercover. They're played by Joska Toller and Ernie Toller.
Okay.
And so they're looking for the terrorists. So Narendra, in order to get his business rivals out of the way, gives the tip to these cops that, oh, I know the terrorists you're looking for. It's these two very shady Arab ladies who are up to very suspicious things. So
Yeah.
as they're trying to go on their adventure to reclaim their beloved shawarma shop, they are being hunted by these police who think that they're terrorists. It's a very kind of like Harold and Kumar 2 type setup here in a lot
Nice.
of ways. But yeah, it's like it's so goofy. Both of them are like very funny performers. Also, Tim Gentle plays various other side characters as well, including their Aunt Pussy and Tunnel Jesus, who is
Nice.
a guy who dresses like Jesus to kind of rally the terror cell, and he does eventually come in the end as Uncle Samir as well. Like this is just like such a funny, eclectic cast, very clownish over the course of this, such like a high bizarre scenario that keeps getting more bizarre as they go on. I think like a lot of the comedy really comes down to the dynamic between Rula and Mariam, who play basically themselves in this, but they do it in like an over-the-top clownish way. Mariam in particular really puts on this like voice affectation that the two of them did the land acknowledgement before the show, before they kind of entered their characters. So clearly this is not their real voices that they're like, it establishes that contrast for you there. And the way Mariam in particular does her voice, she like does like, it's hard to describe. It's like a like an over the top kind of like baby talk voice but like incredibly vulgar. So
Okay.
like she keep being like, "Why are you being so mean to me? You're so rude, you cocksucker!" Like it's kind of like a one trick pony. Like it's the same joke over
Yeah,
and over
yeah,
again, but
yeah.
it's a funny joke, and they do it really well. So much of it's just like the silly, the zany stuff they get into. There's like commentary about like the war on terror in here, and like the way
Hmm.
that Arab Canadians are treated in these kind of environments, and some political edge there. So many of like the weird. I wrote down this like one exchange of dialogue in here where Rula says, because they're talking about how their uncle Samir was having an affair, and Rula says like to Mariam, "Don't you know what an affair is?" And Mariam says, "Yeah, Ferris wheel." No, it means he was having sex with someone else in front of the children. Like it's just like I don't know. It's like it's stupid humor, but like it's funny stupid humor in a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
of.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know. I could keep going in here. Yeah, the pre-show music played by our two police officers was like very fun, and they kind of like kept like bringing back the music sort of like in lieu of like violence and weapons and shooting. Like there's like
Mm.
the
Oh,
the
that's
bass
cool.
guitar getting played, and then there's like this cool like martial arts sequence that like sort of came out of nowhere and is yeah, kind of funny. And then like I found like the plot sort of resolved itself very quickly in like what we could arguably call a Deus Ex Machina situation, but they kept having this recurring joke about how like characters have like a long complex backstory that they want to tell, and they sort of like highlight how interesting and complex the story is, and then ask up to the stage manager, "Do we have time to tell the story?" And the stage manager says, "No, we don't." So like, oh, well, I
Yeah.
guess we don't get to hear it. As that rule of three joke keeps happening, once we finally get to the end and something similar to that, it's like, do we have time? No. How much time do we have? The show ends in 2 minutes. Like, so then they have to like really quickly wrap it up. And then it does end on this like shockingly like hopeful note, very strong feminine energy that I'll just say what it is that what the world needs is to be reborn in a vagina of love.
You
And
facts.
yeah, and then they bring down this like pink tarp that creates a vagina over
Yes.
the exit. So this is in video cab. So they had for the entire Fringe video cab was set up in a theater in the round setup, but
Yeah.
then the exit to leave the theater was blocked by this vagina
Nice.
threshold. And as they're singing this song about the vagina of love and the show's over, we exit through them as they're singing to us and clapping to us through this vagina of love. And
Yeah.
we are reborn into the world, hopefully to make it a slightly better, slightly more loving, maybe even a little shady place.
Obsessed.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed the show a lot. It was a really fun time.
Nice. Oh, okay. Love that. Okay. Next on the docket is Bob Marley, How Reggae Changed the World. And it is performed by Dwayne Forrest, and company is listed as Dwayne Forrest. This was the best thing I saw
Whoa.
at Fringe.
Whoa.
Um, wow.
It was also a
Okay.
patron's pick, so you are not alone in that opinion.
Yeah. Patrons pick. Dwayne has performed this all over the world. This is also going to Winnipeg Fringe. It's at Winnipeg Fringe as this recording is happening. And then it will be going to Edinburgh Fringe. This piece is perfect. And it also needs to be seen by every human being in the world. Essentially, what it is multi layered. At the end of the experience, you get a little taste of the history of reggae music, a taste of the history of Jamaica, a taste of the history of the slave trade from Africa to the Caribbean, and a taste of the history of Dwayne's personal life. And all of this is weaved together by Bob Marley tunes or tunes that are inspired by reggae or OG reggae tunes. So this piece was in the Tarragon Extra Space for the Toronto Fringe, and it's just Dwayne with a guitar and a microphone, and then the psych behind him that has projections sprinkled in throughout the piece. But it's Dwayne storytelling, either about pockets of his life and how reggae or Jamaican culture has like affected his experience growing up. Also, there's historical moments, like I said, talking about political moments. Like there was a concert called Smile Jamaica where Bob Marley was asked to sort of like helm when there was a bunch of political unrest with the parties in Jamaica. So you learned like little pieces of information like that go far into this, again, these pieces of history that you may not even know about, but then also you're learning about Dwayne's life. And then also everyone in the audience is singing Bob Marley tunes the whole time, because all of these sort of like story pockets are weaved together with song that Dwayne asks the audience to sing along. And personally, I grew up listening to Bob Marley all the time, especially like summer pool parties. Like my dad would put on like a Bob Marley playlist a lot, right? And it's such like Bob's music, but also just reggae in general is such like joyful, like feel good, community oriented genre. And so when you hear all these songs, I was actually also surprised. I was like, I know the lyrics to all these songs, and it's like redemption song. It's One Love, it's Three Little Birds, and there's everyone like. But I was actually shocked. I was like, whoa, yeah, like I know this front to finish, the lyrics of the song, and so did every other human being sitting in that audience. So there was this whole like realization of, wow, we are more of a community than we think we are by us singing along with these songs. And then Dwayne taking us on these journeys of self, of Bob, of reggae, of Jamaica, and it all being encapsulated in just this like, let's sit down for 60 minutes and actually just sing some music and learn and be in community with each other. And there was no fourth wall at all. It was like him directly speaking to us, picking out if people were harmonizing in the audience. I was one of them. And then when there was projections that were in the back, he would sometimes reference them directly, or they would just kind of be like present, like a PowerPoint presentation to the story that he's saying, but very, very poignant pictures. So aesthetically, that was a wonderful sort of lift for the performance as well. Dwayne is a phenomenal human being. Again, talking about like authenticity and a genuineness, like there was just such a glow of beauty that Dwayne has, and it just instantly floods the stage. And so we're brought in instantly, and then like I said, kind of go on the journey throughout. There was people too like getting misty throughout, laughing throughout, specific folks that knew maybe a little bit more of the history and they were actually like contributing to it, but other folks that were, there's some parts of the show where Dwayne like asks questions and like some people didn't know the answers, but that's okay. And he kept saying like, thank you for sharing the space with me, or like thanks for sharing the space today, or thanks. So there was a constant like realization of the performer honoring the audience. Literally every little thing is going to be okay. That's how everyone left the theater. Like every single human being leaving the stage was like, I actually heard some people say like, I feel lighter, like this show needs to be brought to everybody in the world right now. And I just think it's a piece that, talk about like transcending of theater, like it's a piece that any human, you don't have to be a theater goer, you don't have to be an artist, you could be any, like anybody needs to see this, because it's such just like a cleanse and refresher in the climate that we're living in right now. So that's another thing that this piece is doing. Like microly, it can be about Dwayne and then about Bob and then about reggae and then about Jamaican culture and then about the history of the slave trade, but it's actually like all encapsulated in this idea of we just need to be together learning things in community and sharing in song. And it's like, wow, that is a message that needs to be sprinkled throughout the world. And beautifully it is, because like I said, the next couple legs of this performance at least are Winnipeg Fringe and Edinburgh Fringe. So, you know, going across the country and then across the pond, and then hopefully just keeps going. I had the opportunity to introduce myself to Dwayne after the performance as well. And again, such a generous, glowing human being. I also shared, you know, my like personal connection and to the music, and also just being an artist myself, and I would love to collaborate with Dwayne in the future too.
You said that to him then, or you're saying it now
oh
on the
yeah,
record?
no, I said to him, and because his musicianship is phenomenal too, like voice and playing of the guitar, and just the marriage of those with the storytelling. It was like you're watching like a concert and a show in one.
Well, it,
everyone left. They're like, wow. I had a couple sitting next to me, this like older man, and he shared something cute. He was like, I really enjoyed hearing you sing alongside. It felt like it was a second show or something. And I was like, thank you. But he goes, wow. He's like, that piece is really going to sit with me for a long time. And I was like, that's good, sir. I was like, yes, we love hearing those things.
nice.
Yeah, I'm grinning from ear to ear because like I would want to see it again because I think it's one of those things like it would probably be the same like show on paper, but it was really like the ambiance of the audience and hearing everyone sing along and chuckle and uh, be affected. It would be different every night, like and just being in the room where that you sort of yeah you get to experience people feeling lighter like that one audience member said, right? So
Mhm. Yeah, it kind of sounds like
ooh,
what you're describing feels a lot like the Soul Pepper docu concerts and like that type of thing.
yeah,
And
yes,
like I
would
feel
love to
like
see this there.
yeah, so after he's finished his Fringe tour, if he wants to come back to Toronto, whoever is the next artistic director of Soul Pepper hopefully saw the show and was taking notes because yeah, seems like a good
And
fit.
then also like I said, this sort of like layered and like you're learning one thing but then it's stacked onto the other. Kind of the genre of reggae like has such a, and Dwayne was explaining this, like such a joyful vibe, but the lyrics themselves and the subtext of it is very like folks coming from that culture like fighting against like, and if you actually it's so interesting because you hear the song and your instinct is just to bop along, but through this sort of like breakdown of song and story, Dwayne peppers us through the lyrics, and you do see the sort of like darker weighed down subtext sort of fight back of identity that a lot of the like folks at the beginning of the reggae origin, like that's why they wrote this music, like it sounds the way it sounds but it says what it says. And so in his performance too, he sort of sifts out the sort of like heavier subtext of what the lyrics are actually saying or what it's actually doing, and he goes into like the background of the song. So it's interesting because like you'll hear the sort of like I said bop along jovial musicality of the piece, but then when you're actually reading the lyrics and saying the lyrics and unpacking what they are, it's heavy, like it's very heavy content. And anyways, just paying homage to the songs themselves and then to himself and his like upbringing. He grew up in Scarborough, so he
Mm.
specifically sort of got as like, you know, particular of that, and then being Jamaican Canadian, excuse me, like growing up in Scarborough and his parents were from Jamaica, and sort of we got a bit of a lineage there as well. So yeah, like I'd see this show every single night. It just was like so lovely to be in that space. And again, he was right. He kept saying like, thank you for sharing the space with me. Thank you for the energy. And I also just think the title of the piece being Bob Marley, How Reggae Changed the World. Again, the whole piece isn't only about Bob Marley, but Dwayne is like the vessel of Bob Marley. Like, and he talked about in that Smile Jamaica concert right before, him and his wife were shot right before that concert. Yet Bob Marley still showed up and still sort of helmed the concert and was there for the people. And I think in a way, Dwayne is like a modern day Bob Marley. Like he is being a vessel for the people and reminding us of like one love, of Three Little Birds, of, you know, Redemption Song, of, yeah, of whistling and every little thing is going to be all right, which is a very, very, very hard concept to think of in today's day and age.
Don't worry, be happy.
Exactly, which is like very hard to do. But when you're in community and sort of focusing as a unit and being, like I said, refreshed and reminded, you have people leaving a space wanting to continue that sort of positive infusion into their everyday lives. And I think I've said this on the podcast too, but the more human beings can tune into their own individual positivity and exude that as their own self, and that's just going to ripple. And if everyone is doing that ripple effect, then hopefully we can be living in a better world than the one we're in now.
Wow.
Wow.
Sorry, I missed
Yeah.
it. You did tell me after you saw it that like, oh, you got to see this. I was like, ah, my schedule is so full. I will try to
Yeah.
fit it in, but it just did not work out. Unfortunate. I'm glad they got the patrons pick that like this is hopefully will come
Yes.
back in many different ways, shapes, and forms.
I think you're right. Like the container of the Soul Pepper concert would fit this really,
Hmm.
really well.
Hmm.
Because again, like I said, Dwayne is such a phenomenal performer. And I know when he was here, because I ended up following him on socials, he did a couple like music matchups with people at like Drum. So he's a musician
Hmm.
alongside the show as well. So I would definitely think that if the show needed to be beefed out a little bit more, like that is would be no problem, like to fit the bill of the Soul
Hmm.
Pepper concerts. And like I said, every human being, regardless of your theater background or what have you, this is like a concert, is a show, is a meditation, is a necessary piece to see.
Nice. No, I'm glad you got to see it and enjoyed it so much.
Alrighty. And next on the docket, before we jump right in, Ryan and I just want to disclose we took a little bit of a break in between this part. So, this is the next day that we're going to be finishing out part two of the Toronto Fringe 2025 Roundup. We are wearing the same clothes, but we look a little different. So, we're exuding liveness, but in a digitized
It,
platform.
it's like we are specifically wearing the same clothes because we thought we might not disclose this, but I feel like the lighting might look a little different for those watching it on YouTube. That
Yeah. Like
why
we
be?
said, it's a busy
Yeah.
month. We gave ourselves a bit of an intermission so that we could focus on these next couple of plays, give our full attention. We're revved and ready. We've got both our beverages, the same cups.
Yeah.
So let's dive back in.
All right.
So we are going to be discussing String of Pearls. The production company listed here is Fuchsia. And Ryan and I both got to see this show. So, Ryan, why don't you give us a little bit of a lay of the lands and then we will jump in?
Okay. I will admit this is a bit of a strange one, and I don't quite know how I feel about it, if I'm being completely honest. It was actually the very first thing that I saw at Fringe this year, which was a strange one to set the tone of the festival with. And I will, in that same spirit, disclose that the performance that I saw was technically a preview, which I did receive permission to review it based on the preview, and especially knowing that you, Jill, would see one later in
Mhm.
the run, we can at least maybe compare notes if some things were a little rough around the edges in my performance. So, what this play is, it's essentially a series of vignettes that all center around this struggling theater company that is currently going through a bit of a regime change. They have a brand new artistic director, this older white guy who's like so quirky and is kind of really bringing this struggling company back into shape that people are finally coming to see their shows again. And what we're specifically told early on is that for a long time they were doing these plays by women and people of color, in which our protagonist, Hallie, played by Fuchsia Boston, how did she pronounce her name?
Boston, Future Boston. Yeah.
Fuchsia, the Boston, apologies. So Fuchsia, who is the playwright, plays our main character, Hallie, who was kind of ruling the roost of this theater company during the previous iterations of the types of shows that they were doing that were very heavily focused on female and stories of color. But now that they have this new white artistic director, he's come on in, he's completely changed the types of things they do, and apparently now people are coming to see the shows. So time's up on progressivism, I guess is the message we're supposed to take here. That's kind of the main setup, but I said it's a series of vignettes, and over the course of the play, we kind of jump through a whole bunch of different things. Some of them feel like, well, very much are set in the context of that theater company, but are completely like different things that don't necessarily feel like they're part of what you would imagine would be the continuous narrative that I just set up there. Some things seem like they're set in the distant past. Sometimes I feel like you're invited to think, oh, maybe this is the plays that they're doing in their company, maybe
Mhm.
not. There's kind of like two central romantic couples that are going on here, Hallie and her boyfriend, whose name I forget, but probably wrote down here somewhere. Uh, Anyway, I don't want to.
I can't remember it either off the top of my
I
head.
don't think I.
It's a very white name. It's just
Yeah,
like a basic white
yeah,
name.
yeah. Sorry, I forgot to write down his name. And like I said, I saw this at the very beginning of the festival, so apologies if I forget some of the finer point specifics. but we have this interracial couple at the center of it, and then we also have this queer couple that is a part, also which is also interracial. So we have these two kind of couples of actors in the company who are together, and we have our artistic director guy as sort of like our main cast here. And other things, yeah, like we go some things in the distant past that you kind of wonder, are these the plays they're doing, or is this the history of the theater company? And it's never really explained.
Hmm.
And we're bookended by these two scenes, kind of light spoilers here, that center around this painting that seems to represent all of the transitionary woes that this company is going towards. It's described as an old womany flower painting that is in the lobby of this theater that Hallie seems to really like. And with the new artistic director's intrusion into the company, that painting is gone. It's not what we do anymore. And the journey that you can track of this painting kind of becomes a bit of a through line through this show.
Hmm.
To slightly address the title, String of Pearls. Now, this isn't something that I was familiar with at all. And I don't know if you are either, because apparently this is like an actor training exercise or improv exercise. I know for a fact that Fuchsia went to your alma mater,
Hmm.
Theater and Drama Studies at UTM in Sheridan. So is this, before I describe what it is this something that you ever like had in your training or were exposed to?
No, it's not, but it's just interesting you tie that in because Fuchsia graduated a couple years behind me, but in my 4 years of that program, and then also Fuchsia and Max Ackerman, who directed this piece too,
Friend
their
of the
years
Cup,
came
yes.
up behind me. Our program went through a changing of guards.
Ah.
So some of our acting faculty and also like our acting exercises were different
Hmm.
because of the change of guard in the program proper. So I don't remember doing this exercise, but quite literally in their back half of their training, obviously that was maybe part of
Okay.
it.
Because,
So,
okay, that makes sense. And I like also for the record, like I'm a TA in that same theater program, but like
mm,
exclusively in like the history and theory courses. I have no connection to the acting courses, so I wouldn't know what kind of things are being done there.
yeah,
But that's interesting to know that there was a shift in power and leadership and teaching, because maybe that's some of where this show comes from. Who could say? Speculation,
yeah.
speculation. But what I understand this string of pearls exercise to be, which for the record is not explained in the show. This is something I had to like look up after
Yeah.
to try to figure out and like I think some of it might be said somewhere in the marketing materials for the show, but not anywhere in like the blurb that shows up like on the Fringe website when you're deciding whether or not to book tickets to the show.
Yeah.
Is that string of pearls, again, as I understand it, is you have a beginning and an end of a story, and you need to come up with various disconnected scenes in the middle that kind of explain how we got there.
Right.
And that, on one hand, I think kind of explains the fragmentary vignette structure of this piece and the
Mhm.
fact that both the opening scene and the ending scene center around this painting in particular. If that is indeed what it is, I struggle to kind of see like how all of these completely disjointed scenes in between are filling in the gaps of that story. You'd think if that was the case where you know where it starts and you know where it ends, that there would be more of a logical through line, but this is
Mhm.
really completely scattershot. It's jumping around. It's meditating on a lot of different ideas and themes,
Mhm.
most of which around race and representation and the arts. But on the whole, yeah, it if the task was to come up with a logical way how we get from point A to point B through stringing these pearls, I don't know if they're fully strung together, in my opinion. I think there's a
Sure.
lot of the writing in this I find is a little rough, a little confusing. I part of me was like, oh, maybe I just don't get it, and I think I will happily concede that there is more to it. Most of the other people I spoke to who also saw the show, because it was a frequent topic of conversation, like, oh, you saw String of Pearls? Okay, let's talk about it, because there's like a lot of weird, interesting stuff that I wanted to get into.
Mhm.
Most people I spoke to also said they didn't get it. Most also said they were unfamiliar with this acting training thing that, again, is not explained in the show proper. So, yeah, like it's a little all over the map, I guess. I don't know. Do you want to please chime in? Don't let me talk this whole time.
Sure. No, just as you, because I think we shared like similar sort of post show reflection
Mhm.
of trying to piece things together, like you were saying, but just in you unpacking it a bit more, it's kind of justifying certain things potentially for me, like the idea that it is a bunch of fragmented scenes. I kind of want to talk about like the framing that was kind of set up for this piece. So like the character who comes out as this like middle-aged white man, new artistic director, kind of has this enters on stage, and it was this sort of like we're in between the outside the fourth wall and inside the fourth wall. At first, I was like, oh, is this just a performer kind of like explaining what we're about to see? But then as he started talking, he was like, oh no, this is a character. This is the AD saying, like, welcome to our theater. Like, this is whatever, whatever. And then we jump into the piece. So I actually, framing wise, to me, that kind of, it kind of makes sense because if we see this character as like this new artistic director who's quirky, kind of off his footing, maybe not really listening to his company and listening to the stories that want to be told, and then just kind of putting something up. That to me kind of justifies a bit of the fragmentation. Also, it can create a frame of this is my company now. Look at what we're doing. And like what they're doing is disjointed and maybe a bunch of sparks to something that could be a production or right. Like, because now I'm thinking, we get the scenes of the characters, but maybe the scenes of the characters are part of the first play that this artistic director is putting on in this space. So then now, as I'm talking through all of that, of this like potential for it to be like this sort of multi-layered, like almost like play within a play, like look at this first play I'm putting on, which is actually the play is my company of actors having their personal coupley moments talking about the company and the company trying to put on fragmented pieces of history, of talking about art, of race. And then it maybe not hitting the mark at the end can maybe justify that or like be the reason why that's set up that way. I don't know if that was sort of Fuchsia and Max's vision there, but I can maybe see that being, because again, we always talk about this too, right? Like Fringe being the initial platform for some of these pieces and some of these works. And this is what I love about and what we've heard feedback of the Cup particularly is Ryan and I's little nerdy dramaturgical brains kind of dive into the piece and are like, maybe this was it. And then I've actually had reflection, people saying like, that kind of wasn't it, but like maybe we'll try that out or something. So even if what we're talking about right now is just like an offering of how we feel, or if you do take this next steps kind of thing. Another thing I talking about, we've talked about this in a bunch of episodes too. I don't mind if there's lack of structure in a piece, especially if it is like Carol Churchill's My Girl. I love when we don't have the sort of Freytag's pyramid-esque like point A to point B to point C sort of male structuring. So the fact that it was fragmented and also heavily infused, you could tell by Fuchsia and Fuchsia's words and Fuchsia's experiences, that was very like lovely to kind of see. I just think I do agree with you. This kind of what I just offered, and is there a way going forward with this piece of like, I don't think you necessarily have to like mold it too much more, but maybe playing with this, like, is this a show within a show narrative? That might sort of justify, because I do think the scenes proper had like good punchy moments, or like there's a monologue that Fuchsia does that has some good like poetic moments,
like a slam poem even.
Exactly. And so it makes for a very like I also do feel like there's like postmodern potential for this as well, but again, just maybe stringing that together
it's
more.
like if we could talk, because you've mentioned the sort of like play within the play idea there. Well, and this is something that I kind of like struggle with this piece, because we have like these, for the most part, even though it's like very isolated individual scenes, for the first chunk of it, they all do still feel like they're part of that same present day story with this theater company. And we have one scene in particular where Hallie confronts the artistic director about how, like, I think the plays you're programming are problematic. I don't want to do it. And they talk in very vague terms about like what this play is and about, and they don't like get into any specifics. And you're like, okay, well, this argument might be more compelling if we knew what was problematic about this play, other than just that it's problematic.
Time. Hello, everyone. So Funny thing happened when Ryan and I jumped back into recording the rest of this episode. The fire alarm went off in the space that we were recording. So we had to press pause. In that, I had to do a show at Hamilton Fringe. Ryan got to see that show. We've had a day. It's been warm. I've got some Gatorade. Yeah, so we're back. And
This
how
episode
is
is
this going to go?
cursed.
We're going to wrap up our thoughts on String of Pearls and then advance to the next couple of shows. Thank you for hanging in and stringing along this episode with us. Ryan, why
Uh,
don't you wrap up your thought there and then we'll
yeah.
advance?
Just the last thought that I was in the middle of when the fire alarm so rudely interrupted us with String of Pearls is that we have an early scene where Hallie is fighting with the new artistic director guy about the types of stuff that he's programming and specifically how she thinks these plays are problematic and we shouldn't be doing them. And they're offensive and they speak in very vague terms about, well, what is this play? Like, what could it be that's like, maybe this argument would feel a little more credible if you actually like described why you thought it was problematic or offensive. And then in this vignette structure that we've been discussing, there's a scene later on that's set in like the distant past, like the antebellum period, where the same company of actors are playing the characters in the scene, and they're doing it in such like an over-the-top melodramatic, historical, and histrionic way
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like in that moment, I thought, okay, this is the play. This is the thing that she thinks is offensive. And it's set in the past and seems to be about the history of minstrel performance and the way that enslaved people were used as the models for white people to don blackface and take on these caricature personas.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, you're like, okay, I understand what Hallie's gripe was. But then that scene sort of just like comes and goes, and like there's never like a frame breaking moment. And then more scenes happen. We get another scene that's also set in the past and doesn't seem to be connected to that one, but also seems to be about like folks starting a school. And
Right.
watching this, like I thought I figured it out. I'm like, okay, well, that was the play within the play, to use the language you were using earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But then as we're kind of getting these different scenes, I'm like, well, is it, or is this like the actual history of the theater that like we're set in? And are
Mm-hmm.
we like kind of playing a long game and it's like not the play within the play? And it's raising questions, I guess, but like I kind of left it thinking like, well, I don't really know what to make of it. Like, if this is the play within the play, then why is there kind of never like a later acknowledgement of like, well, what does this play mean? And or like a later scene where they even like kind of grapple with the now that you've seen the play, what do we do about it? And
Yeah.
if it's not the play within the play, but if it's the actual history, then one, we're still left with the question of, well, what was the offensive play that Hallie was taking issue with? And then we're also, okay, but like, what are these little pockets of history doing for the story? It's stringing something together, but like, I feel like there wasn't enough string or connective tissue between each of these little pearls that it really kind of all came together into something that necessarily felt like it had a strong thing to say about the politics of race and representation in these theatrical settings, nor did it really kind of bring us through this journey of like, what does this painting actually represent and how do we deal with the shifting tide of aesthetic preferences. I also, just another thought that I had like in that same vein is when we saw that play, or at least the scene set in the antebellum period, and for the brief moment when I did think this is the play within the play, I was like, well, why is this the thing that the public supposedly has an appetite for that is getting people to come back and see their shows again? They say it multiple times that like the finally people are seeing our plays, they're like, this kind of racist thing, this is what the audience wants. Is that a commentary on the audience, or is this not the play altogether?
Yeah.
Again, it's fine for plays to not have clear, definitive answers, but you should at least kind of understand what the questions it's raising are. I don't know. Does anything I say sort of here provoke thoughts from you?
Yeah, like I agree with you as well. But again, like I said earlier, that being the platform for this piece, like, yeah, taking it elsewhere, like going in, maybe tightening some stuff up, adding, like you just said, moments of more questioning versus it being a bit fragmented. I think this piece could be sort of fleshed out into yeah, a more sort of like cohesive stab.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah, I think we leave String of Pearls
Yeah,
there.
we've been talking about this for literally hours.
Yeah. And we shall advance to the next show, which is Fish Tales, Real Stories, Real Magic. You'll be hooked. And this is Fish the Magish is the performer and also listed as the company here. So Ryan, you saw this one. So give us a synopsis and tell us your thoughts.
Okay, so you might recall from last year's Fringe that Fish the Magician had a show then too called Abracadabra Haha. And he's a funny guy, half magician, half comedian, storyteller. Last Fringe, actually, like while you didn't get to see his show, you saw him doing like little magic like inlines for other shows or between venues. And you, even though we did multiple episodes, not all of which you were on, you insisted like I gotta be on the episode when you talk about Fish the Magician because like I wanna be there to just talk about how amazing his like up close magic was.
Yeah.
And sure enough, Fish the Magician took that clip of you praising his piece from the episode and put it as part of like the publicity like on his
I didn't
Fringe
know
page.
that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So if anyone was like looking through the Fringe website, it's like, oh, what's Fish the Magician? What does press have to say about it? It links directly to a clip of you who didn't see the show, but saw enough of his magic that you felt it was praisable.
Right.
And I certainly gave it a very positive review at the time. I told sort of the funny backstory that I have with this particular performer that people can check out that previous episode. So I don't need to reiterate it here. And because I saw that he had another show this year and I knew that this was coming, when I did Phil Rickaby's stage-worthy live stream, the pre-Fringe event that I was part of, I certainly gave this an emphatic shout out of this is something that I'm very excited about because hey, it's Fish the Magician. What a funny personal backstory I have with him, and he's a great magician and performer. So this show, Fish Tales, his kind of bold follow-up, while still very magic heavy, leans a bit more into like a storytelling angle. I think like with Abracadabra Haha, he's like, yeah, I did kind of just like the comedy plus magic equals fun angle, but he's actually had an interesting revelation about his own life in the time since then that I forget the exact specifics of like what the order of events was, but through 23andMe type DNA type process, he learned that he is adopted and found who his
Oh,
birth parents were.
wow.
Well, yeah, or actually, and apologies as I'm kind of like maybe forgetting the details. Maybe he already knew he was adopted but didn't know who his birth parents were. But either
Okay.
way, through the magic of this kind of genealogical science, he had this kind of like big identity reshaping event.
Right.
So peppered between magic tricks, he kind of comes back to this story. And also, since his last foray at the Toronto Fringe, he has retired from his day job as a high school guidance counselor and now is committed to performing and doing his magic full time. So these are kind of like two sort of seismic life events that are forming some of the storytelling stuff throughout this show. I will say, as a storyteller, there is a bit of a roughness to his performance. He's very in his element when he's doing the magic, and especially when he's cracking jokes within the magic. But you could tell that something about like getting personal with this material, very sincere, but there is something that maybe again, I don't want to necessarily read too much into the personal elements of it, but like there is an element of I think performance anxiety around it. Like he kind of like stumbles on his lines, he forgets things, he goes back. Your mileage will vary, I guess, watching this performance, how much that takes you out of it when half of
Right.
the marketing pull is that it's not just magic, but it's also these stories. While the stories are like interesting and they are clearly like relevant and personal to him, I think so maybe more dramaturgy, more rehearsal for how he
Mhm.
actually kind of like goes about these would maybe help tighten that element of the show.
Sure.
My a friend of mine, Sonia Hamid, who reviewed the show for Next magazine, really kind of like leaned into that. Yes, there's a roughness to it. She saw it very early in the run, but that's like kind of part of its charm and part of the personal veneer. And he kind of tells stories like a guidance counselor, the sort of like goofy guy who gives you like fun advice like in your school. And like I think that sort of is fitting with how it's all framed here. And what she said in her review is that even if there was some of that roughness, it'll hopefully get smoothed out as the run goes on. I did see it later in the run, and that never really, to my view, got smoothed out, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
as he does more iterations of these types of shows over time, it certainly probably will. The kind of unfortunate additional wrinkle that I'll say is that Sonya's take was that even if the storytelling is rough, the magic is amazing, as we know from seeing his previous magic tricks. And that's certainly true most of the time. I will say, in the particular unfortunate instance where I saw the show, a few of the tricks didn't work out.
Mm,
And he kind of just had to like stop doing them because something had gone wrong and there was no way it was going to arrive at the big mesmerizing conclusion that it was building towards, including one particular trick that uses mathematics and arithmetic in some way that Sonia in her review specifically highlighted as like this is like the most impressive trick. That one didn't work out. So I don't even know how that was supposed to go or what the conclusion was. The tricks that did work certainly did work, but there was more than one on the performance I saw that didn't, which unfortunately doesn't allow the wowing illusions to
right.
compensate for the roughness of the storytelling. So as a result, I would say that this certainly compared to last year and certainly compared to my brother's bar mitzvah over like 15 years ago, which is still the standard I hold this man to. This one was a bit of a letdown for me, unfortunately. I'm sure other people saw better versions of it on different days. I can't control the one that I happened to see, but I didn't want to be dishonest about the experience that I had with this particular show. But I still like him a lot. I think the tricks he does are really good. There was one trick that did work on my show, but it's one that he actually repeated from last year's show. The one
Mm,
where he and I kind of even shouted it out in our review last year, where he has like a back to back with someone. They're reading aloud from a book, and he's like getting the exact passages bang on correctly, but we, the audience, see that he's reading along from his own identical copy of the book. So, haha.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
then he shows that all the pages are blank. That trick still worked, but I've seen it before. So even
Right, right,
the
right.
so again, too many little wrinkles with this one for me to get too excited about it. But Fish the Magician, what a guy, what a mensch. I will still go
Yeah.
back and see more of his shows, and I hope he does keep polishing his act and bringing it back fringe after fringe, year after year, venue after venue, in whatever way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, even though you said, yes, I mean, here's the thing too, right? It's live theater. Even if
Yeah,
you're a magician, I mean, look at what happened with like in Vegas, people actually get harmed when magic
sure. Yeah.
is
Yeah, this is
involved.
low stakes
That's what I'm
and
saying. And there is something kind of like, I don't know, quirky and lovely about, like you said, like his whole shtick is he's a guidance counselor who kind of does the magic on the side.
well,
So
yeah, and now is making it his full-time gig because he's
exactly,
just
yeah.
like a couple months ago, literally at the end of the school year, retired from that long-standing day job.
Yeah, so it's like, fish is finding his fins, like
Hey,
we're yeah.
he's getting his land
I
legs.
I still stand by that review I gave last year. Like what a
So do I,
magical
and what me describing my experience last year, what I saw this year has no
totally.
bearing on
Yeah,
undercutting
yeah,
any of
yeah.
that. And something that I'll also say is that now that he recognizes me from the last year's iteration, like I kept running into him because I spent a lot of time at the Soul Pepper hub of this year's Fringe where his show was, and we
Yeah.
kept seeing each other, and he would, similar to what you described, he would like pull stuff out of his pockets and his sleeves and just like do magic tricks to me in the middle of like lines or waiting between shows. So yeah, and like when he's on,
Yeah.
he's on. It is really impressive
Yeah.
the stuff he's able to do and very charismatic, of course.
And you're still friends with Fish the Magician, so that must glow your heart for
Yes.
sure.
Yes, it is very special, and I still tell my family about it. I saw Fish the Magician again, and they're so
Yeah.
excited. Like, it's great.
Nice.
Yes, this will always hold a special place in our personal history, this journey we've been on together. I just, that said, I don't want to use that to cloud my view of the particular show that I did see at this year's Fringe.
Right.
Mhm.
Nice. Let's swim along to the next show, which is Mutual Aim by Zest Creative. This is the show that I saw. Zest Creative was a dance show. So it was a double bill. There were 5 performers. They are called Zest Creative. So the second show was a piece that they had created themselves and they choreographed and they performed. And then the first show was, I'm going to read the title because it's long, but it's lovely. The delicate art of art making, reframing phenomenology toward a subversive praxis, reimagining an on oftological portfolio of radical
Yeah,
dichotomies.
I'm looking at it in front of you here. There's like parentheses in the middle of words. There's slashes. It's
Yeah.
like, this is my kind of title.
And
Not gonna lie. I wish I'd seen it
so
actually.
the first show, the choreographer was Louis Leberge Cote. So it was the 5 performers carrying out his show. And then the second show, like I said, was the 5 of them carrying out the piece that they created. And both pieces sort of examined, and this description was kind of broad, but both pieces were very like artiste, I want to say, in a lot of ways. Like there were different things you can be grabbing from them, especially the second one. But yeah, so just the description of both pieces examining how individual personalities fit within group dynamics. And indeed, it was filled with satire and sincerity. There was theatrical clowny moments. There was just contemporary dance moments. There musicians, two of the performers play the keyboard and the guitar as we take along these pieces. So both were like had this as the shell of what's going on, but very different. So I'll talk about both of them individually. Okay, so the first show being the piece by Louis Leberge-Coté that the five did. So basically, there are five performers in the middle of a rehearsal. So one of them is playing guitar, the other is on keyboard, and there's three dancers. And they're going through a Song of Queens and the band, and it's just like they're like gesturing like so hard to each lyric, but then like they're not doing it cohesively, or one of them, you know, pops away and is like, we need to do this again, or we need to start from the top. So it very much is like you're inside the moments of the show, which is them like rehearsing the show, but then there's like not like a cohesion between all of them, both like in the choreography itself, but then also in their attitudes and their demeanors, the stress levels. Again, there's comedy. The one performer who's behind the keyboard is like, can we just get this thing going? The performer behind the guitar is like having his own solo moment. There's a time where two of the dancers are bickering downstage, and then that's where the intimacy happens. The other dancer is like jumps on the guitarist and they're like making out backstage. So clearly there's like a showmance going on there, but it was all kind of sewn into, like, you could tell the collective like learned this choreo of the dance. And then Louis Leberge-Coté's vision was probably like, okay, now let's make it as if we're in rehearsal, and these are all actors that are like trying, or dancers trying to put this on. So it was kooky. It was very fun. Some of the dance like had like there was part of the moments where they were like running across the stage, and like one of the performers is MIA and they're like trying to find. So again, it was just a very neat, multi-layered performance. Like it really was. Even kind of like there's like a little bit of a slam poetry moment. There's like again like this overindulgence of text mixed with like the body gesticulation. So like they were all in on playing this like satirical, beautiful contemporary piece, but then like showing the tension of each individual amongst that. And with it being like a rehearsal, the show is a rehearsal of these performers. That was another thing they said in the relaxed performance, is in that particular piece, they all use their own names that are in the program, but they all disclose, they said, those are our own names, but they are characters. They're not our actual selves.
Yeah. Auto fiction.
Yeah. So yeah, it was quite fun. And it was, again, it turned a little bit on like the postmodern light bulb for me too. I was like, oh, this is kind of neat. This is like how do we kind of like put every single genre in this like magic snow globe or something and shake it up? And it's just like a bunch of like kooky actors playing kooky characters trying to put on a kooky piece. Like,
yeah. Can I ask before, because I feel like you're about to move on to the second piece, but before we get away from this one, having seen it with that long mouthful of a title, what do you think that means in relation to the substance of it, the actual performance?
I think it hits everything on the nose. I think like when we see like great pieces of art, or like read great essays, or like there is that balance of like this long academic text of a title, but then you're actually seeing like this like quirky sort of like rough around the edges like piece of art. Like I feel like that goes hand in hand with a lot of like iconic art pieces in history. It's like, whoa, this is the thing. And then you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the thing. And I think it also just presses upon like it presses upon kind of like the human nature, like look at this sort of like, ooh, we're gonna do this piece almost like a practice of humanity. And then you really find like we're all just like a bunch of clowns with like varying degrees of emotion regulation and all trying to like get through a song, get through a piece, get through, you know, a collaborative process, but yet our individuality can kind of sometimes get in the way or like add to the community. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I feel
Okay.
like
Yeah.
there's more I can kind of.
I think it's like deliberately probably opaque in some ways.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's not trying to be fully like completely. At least I would imagine having not seen the show, but like it's a bit too much academic jargon to just be like, well, don't you get exactly what it's saying? But
Right,
yeah.
right. Like, and that's the thing. And I think that's what's beautiful about this piece too, is like I said, and this is a great segue to the second one, where every audience member can kind of take a little bit of what they want from this. Like you could just watch it as like this, like I said, rehearsal within a play or play within a play kind of thing, or you can kind of pick apart like why are the gestures the way they are, why they're taking. There was a lot of like the performers kind of like peppering in like how they remember like certain motions or certain choreography was like, and this is like the feminist, like the birthing moment or like something like it was. So we got to kind of be a fly on the wall of how they kind of like pieced through this too. So you could, again, if I saw it again, I would dig through and yeah, definitely like the title, probably write an essay about the piece. Like
Right.
yeah. So then kind of segueing to the second piece. Also, between pieces, there was like a good, like, I want to say 5 minute intermission as they kind of set the tone for the next one and turn and got into costume for the next one. So that was kind of interesting for like a fringe
Yeah, that's
show.
for
This was
sure.
only like a 45-minute installment they had, and there was like a 5 minute breather in the middle, like you said. So the second one, they were kind of all dressed in like different street clothes. And this one felt a bit more like a meditation. Like the first piece was, like I said, very like high vibration, a lot of pinging all over the place of personality and emotion. Whereas this one was kind of more just like a fluid, how I felt like a fluid, like meditation of what these pieces are trying to do, like them examining the individual personalities within group dynamics. So they were all in street clothes and there were different phrases. I can't remember the specifics, but it was kind of like talking about like memory, talking about time, talking about going back there. And it was basically like a contemporary piece where they all kind of walked on stage like backwards or at varying degrees and kind of were like shifting each other. And then as the piece kind of like started to breathe, we like centered around one character and like the other bodies were kind of like moving her body or like trying to support but like clearly emphasize this one human. And then there was beautiful like choreo exchange between our male presenting figure and Eva, I believe, was the performer who was kind of mirroring him and was like like they did like this contact improv, like tossing another body like through them to kind of like show this relationship, this like connection and break of two bodies. But like there were times where they were like a body was like acting as the other person, or like there were times where again one character would like it's kind of hard to explain, to be honest, but this one again it was very much like using dance and like fragmented pieces of text to discover or to unveil like individuals in community but then out. And then like again because the words of like memory and time and there it just kind of seemed like they were all vessels. It didn't really seem like there was quite like a narrative, and I think that was on purpose. I think there was just like vessel like human vessels meditating on this theme. And it was lovely that like that was the second show because like I said, in contrast to the first, which was a bit more like there was a story, there is like it was in like the shell of, like I said, like high vibration and like in like we could see the character, whereas this was a good end to just like meditating on the fluid depiction of humans. But again, because of that, I think, and every audience member would have their own take on this. Like I saw the relationship. So like there were a lot of themes of like love and like loss or like identity of self through love or like, and I think this show also helps to gurgitate in the audience like what they might be feeling like personally. I feel like I've gone on a journey of like love and finding out what love is in self and in with someone else. So I feel like this piece, I was kind of subconsciously seeing those things sussed out. Whereas maybe someone else who's going through like grief or like, loss or a memory kind of punched in, they would experience something different. So I've said this before in these dance reviews where I love this genre performance because it is so broad. And I feel like dance, especially of all of our different avenues of the industry, because sometimes there's very little text that you can create the narrative and meditate on a narrative yourself, like as the audience member, right? And so that kind of concluded it. And then, yeah, when the piece ended, they just kind of all came to the downstage. They did a bow, and that was that. So it was like two shows in one. Yeah, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
I brought my friend Emily along as well, and she had a wonderful time too. So yeah, that's Mutual Aim by Zest Creative. Thank you, folks. Looking forward to future projects too. Like every performer was extremely captivating, and everyone had, like I said, especially this piece, I think calls for individuality of self too, and everyone had like you could tell their own individual expression within the choreo of both pieces, and I love seeing that as well because that's what makes the community, right? All standout, unique individuals. So, yeah, looking forward to more works from Zest Creative. Okay, so moving on to Quiltro. This is a show by Basil Page Productions. And Ryan, you saw this one. So, give us a little summary and what you thought about it.
Okay. This is one that I'm kind of still grappling with what I thought about it. And I think why I've continued to grapple with it for probably actually longer than many other shows that I saw this year is because I think I need to admit right out of the gate that I don't know if I got it. And I think like that's just a humbling experience that like I will describe it from my perspective, what I did get from it.
Yeah.
But it very directly gestures to something broader than what it seems that the play itself is doing on the surface. And as a result, with my limited knowledge about that connection and the extent to which I don't really feel like the play was invested in explaining that connection to the unknowing audience in that way, I think there's a lot of gaps in my own knowledge of how I was able to appreciate this piece. So this is a new play by Yasmin Agox, and it is directed by Sennia Lyle. It's a two-hander. Alejandra Angobaldo is one of the performers, and Chalea McNally Rondon. Apologies, as always, if we're mispronouncing anyone's names. So this is a story about a young girl named Nina who comes from a Spanish-speaking Chilean family in Canada. After her parents' divorce, she decides that she's going to run away from home, and not just run away from home, but specifically live among what she calls her own kind, and that is feral dogs. That she is going to find this pack of dogs that she's going to live with, and she will be more at home with them than she is in her tough home life in her human family unit, fracturing human family unit. And it is essentially kind of just that. And it's told in this sort of like interesting two-hander way where both performers at times seem to be playing Nina. One of them, Chalea, seems to be doing her more often and consistently, but then Alejandra also seems to be kind of like sometimes narrating as Nina. Maybe she's like a different part of Nina's mind. It's not necessarily like clear to the audience exactly how the lines have been divided this way, but Alejandra also plays various other characters who, well, they both kind of play various characters throughout point, but that Nina encounters along the way. One of them is this seemingly unhoused man who is referred to in the show as Ombre, and they sort of like form this kind of like bond as two people on the fringes of society going on this kind of adventure together. But there's this constant looming threat of some sort of mythical predatory canine figure that is referred to in the show by a very subversive name, and that's Little Shit. That is on one hand, it kind of deflates the threat of what this thing is, but it is very much a malevolent force that, spoiler alert, does show up on stage in the form of a very fascinatingly designed puppet that we do see on stage here. I'm trying to see, was the puppet designer credited specifically? Because it was a pretty remarkable puppet. Set and props are by Ariana Rizvi. So perhaps that is who did the puppet. Apologies if there is somebody who is more deserving of that credit in particular. So yeah, like this is kind of like a, kid goes out on their own coming of age sort of adventure. And on the surface, it really just feels like that's what it is.
Hmm.
But why I say it's gesturing towards something bigger than what it seems like on the surface is because at various points during the show, that remember is situated within this kind of Chilean diaspora context, the two performers will periodically break into this kind of narration that is completely in Spanish. It's not subtitled on stage or surtitled, so we, if non-Spanish speakers in the audience like myself, do not necessarily know in the moment what they're saying, why they're saying it, what's prompting them to break the frame in this way. And that happens a lot throughout the show. And then at the very end of the show, there is this archival audio recording of a man's voice, and it sounds like an old historical recording, saying what, again, isn't completely in Spanish, but sounds like it is that same piece of text that we've been hearing
Hmm.
throughout. And the show ends and that never gets explained. But sitting on each of our chairs as we enter the theater is this document, this two double-sided stapled pages that has the English translation of the text of Salvador Allende's last speech. Me, as somebody who doesn't know a lot about Chilean history, had to look this up because that isn't necessarily explained by the substance of the speech itself, although you can certainly pick out context clues. But he was the president of Chile in 1973 when Augusto Pinochet had his military coup and overthrew the government, and he killed himself or died of suicide, presumably a few days later, instead of being arrested and sent to whatever kind of prison or military tribunal that he would have faced otherwise. Granted, while this was seated on the seat as you come into the theater, I didn't have a chance to read through it prior to the show about to begin. And once again, the show doesn't explain that that's what this text is, but you can leave with this paper and read it at your leisure after. And I was excited to read this because I'm like, okay, this will probably contextualize what this kind of broader historical connection is that the play itself, again, is gesturing towards by virtue of invoking this speech in its original language, peppered throughout this story, but doesn't forge that connection for you while you're watching it. So I read the speech, and yeah, it is the kind of strong leader, not going down without a fight, not wanting to cede power to his political enemies. But I've struggled to it didn't answer my questions about, well, what is this connection? What does the story about the girl and her dogs have to necessarily tell us about this particular political history? And I tried to even pick out specific lines in here. There's one point in his speech where he says, I address the youth, those who sang and gave us their joy and their spirit in the struggle. But okay, so youth, maybe that's something with this child character. Is this an allegory for the larger political situation, or is
Hmm.
this political situation a kind of backdrop for this personal story? I don't know. There's the
Hmm.
thing about how history will judge them. Again, I'm just trying to pick out individual lines here.
Hmm.
And in the calm metal of my voice will not reach you. It does not matter. You will continue to hear me. I will always be beside, or at least my memory will be that of a dignified man who was loyal to his country. So the calm metal of his voice is what we hear at the end of the show. There's things in the substance of the speech that I'm this. Okay, you are the show are provoking my thoughts about what do these two things have to say to each other. But this isn't a show that is interested in educating the audience about that connection. It almost acts as though it thinks everybody already knows this history in 2025 Toronto, which I would say, unless you have roots to Chilean or maybe more broadly South American culture, maybe you do know about this, or if you've studied that history, which I will admit I haven't. But yeah, putting these two things side by side each other is fascinating and thought-provoking, but I am struggling to forge that connection for myself in the absence of that knowledge. And as a result, if not given this document, this little piece of paratext that you get to take home with you and read at your leisure, or maybe in some people's cases, read while they're waiting for the show to start, I don't even think I would have clocked or even remembered the prominence of those Spanish monologues. It would have just been like, okay, yep, story of the girl and this kind of dog journey that she's going on. And oh, right, every so often they said something in Spanish, and because I don't speak Spanish, I don't know what they were saying, but I'm sure it was important to that story. The fact that
Right.
it is this other thing entirely that points to a historical context that seems very much divorced from what is going on in the main story indicates that there's something more there, something that I regrettably cannot claim enough expertise or analytical insight into to be able to fully grasp and grapple with what that connection is. I would say that's unfortunate for my own just pure enjoyment of the story. I do think it was like still well performed. The two leading ladies were very like good at sort of jumping between their roles. Alejandra in particular, this is now like the third Fringe in a row that I've seen her in, because 2 years ago she was in The Bad Mitzvah, and the year after that, last year, she was in Gringas, part of that large ensemble cast of Spanish speaking performers. So yeah, very good. Chalea also, like, yeah, very good job. She kind of like take on more of like the protagonist role of both of them, even though there was sort of like a baton passing in this way. And yeah, the puppetry was really cool. There's like a
Great.
nice little story here, but I I know it wants to be more than that, and I feel bad that I can't personally give it credit for that. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah,
been really
yeah.
like struggling with
Totally.
how to articulate my own experience with this show and the awareness that there's something else here.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
Um,
I would love if somebody like completely got it and like understands these history connections, wants to get in the
Hop in the
comment section
comments.
and explain it to me. Like I would love to hear that. And I'm not saying therefore that these are any like issues or lack of merit in the show, that it doesn't spoon feed ignorant gringos like myself to understand what's happening here. But as an ignorant gringo, there was only so much and a bit of a ceiling to what I could personally get from this piece.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, great. We'll put a pin in Quiltro. Moving on to our next show is Apothecary, and this is by Pitchin' In Productions. And both Ryan and I saw this. Ryan, why don't you give us a synopsis, and then both of us will chat about it.
So it's a musical. It's one of the musicals that was playing at Theater Pass Mariah as part of Derek Chua's curated series of shows that he was producing there as a satellite venue in this year's Fringe. We've talked about a few of these musicals already, and we will continue to talk about more of them into part three of this roundup. It's set in this kind of like time bubble, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's like the proper quantum mechanics of how to describe what this world is, but it is an apothecary shop that women from various points throughout history are able to converge into, regardless of when and where they come from, can show up here to get resources completely for free from the duo of shopkeepers, or
Mm-hmm.
pharmacists, I guess, if you will, or apothecaries. One of them was named Tilly, who's like more of the apprentice kind of learning the ropes character. She's played by Sydney Marion, and the other is referred to only as Lady or the Lady, and she is played by Laura Pichinen, who is one of the writers of this show. On one hand, like they sort of just like really like gloss over or not gloss over but kind of like brush over like yep, just get on board with this premise that people, women from all history can just show up here and in whatever kind of very gendered situations and issues they find themselves in, this shop is able to help them out,
Mm-hmm.
but with some sort of caveats to how they're able to help. They can't offer medical interventions that post-date the time period that woman comes from, because there could be ethical ramifications of if anyone
Yes.
catches you with penicillin, you'll be thought of as a witch and they'll burn you at the stake, etc., etc. So it's them kind of needing to figure out how to play the game of what does this woman need and how can we help, even though we have almost infinite resources to help this person, but there's sort of parameters that need to be played within. Tilly, as the apprentice, chafes against those restrictions. Like, if we have all of this stuff, why can't we help people? But Lady knows the grave consequences of it all. And there's a bit of a discourse through running through that we can talk to more. On one hand, I
Mm.
would say that this piece kind of like vibes a lot like the opening scene of Carol Churchill's Top Girls in a lot of way, that you have all these kind of like types of women from different parts of
Yep.
history commingling in this space with like a very brusque explanation of how this is even happening, but it's just like, yep, this is it. You kind of get on board with the premise. It's not really interested in explaining the time travel mechanics of how do we get here? How does a shop like this exist? How do people arrive at it? But it is on a more broader metaphorical level about women and female solidarity and being there for each other and wanting to find the best and most appropriate ways of helping out given the broad swath of different types of issues that these various people can be encountering at any given time. How's that for
Mhm.
sort of like a kind
No,
of
yeah, I
it's
think that's
a
perfect.
it's a stringy piece, so it's a bit of a stringy description, but what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, so this piece, like with it being and how it's described in their description is within the magical walls of a living sanctuary. So yeah, I do want to talk about sort of the through line of Tilly and Lady's relationship that takes us through the piece, and then want to talk about the standout sort of segments
Sure.
of the piece as a whole. I love the heartbeat of what this piece is trying to do. The music slaps. I
Agreed.
do find with all of the musicals in the theater pass Marai space. It's a terrible space for musicals. And I felt so bad for every production, just from like a sound perspective and just the way that sound is carried. It's a cloudy space. So I'll be saying this pretty much with every musical we discuss. And then just particularly with this piece, Allison's, like I said, the music is stunning.
Sorry,
The
Alison
lyric,
Wither, who wrote the
Alison Wither,
music. I
yes,
don't
who
think I
is
named her in my previous description, so just
right.
interjecting.
Yes. So Alison Wither was a music director and composer. The songs are stunning. Like I want all of them for my book, but the lyrics are very quick and quippy. And so again, sometimes I found the balance of like just the sound in the space and then the balance of voices in the space with the speed of the text. Some of it was lost. So that's just kind of like a qualm or like right out of, I guess
Yeah,
is that the right word? Yeah, like
yeah, it's
right
an
out of
unfortunate
the gate.
technical issue that impedes your ability to fully lock into the piece.
But it's the sort of like relationship of women. So I kind of want to talk about that. So like yes, so we have Lady and Tilly who helm this space. So Tilly is from like the 60s,
Yeah,
70s like hippie era, and Lady is like your standard apothecary like 1800s like
hard
old
to say.
timey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you have women coming in from like Renaissance era, from like the, 50s, from like the early 1900s. Again, they don't necessarily always say when, but by the costuming, which was phenomenal. And I don't think they have their costume designer
Let me
listed, but
check.
at least on this page, if you
Yeah,
have it in
not
front of you.
certainly
Um,
not in the
Very
print program here.
poignant pieces, beautiful. I thought the color schemes were very balanced and lovely and popped off. So definitely tipping my hat to costuming. But having the different women come in and sometimes relate to each other or sit at the same table or sing the same song and not know why they're with this woman, but like experiencing something through them. I thought that was a very cool layer because it's like these women would never meet each other because they're from different eras, but they're allowed to meet in this sanctuary. But then there's this kind of like dance around like, what do I tell her? Or how do I tell her? Or is my experience the same? Or is it not? And I do feel like this piece is showing like just how like every woman interacts with other women. Like there is that sort of like how much or how little do I say, or like how do I relate or can I relate to this woman? So I thought this piece does a good job of hitting on the nose like these women are from different eras and they may not have the same vocabulary or experiences, but it's like no, that just also just is a symbolism for like women existing in today's world and trying to help each other out but living under, like they say in the description, a world built for men. So that's sort of like the clients interactions. But then, like I said, you have Tilly and Lady who are working together. So you get this sort of theme of women supporting under a magnifying glass with Tilly and Lady. And there's this tension between them because like you said, like Tilly has like this very like radical like, well, why can't we help them? And then Lady saying, well, we can't because of this and this and this. I did find though at the end of the piece, and I don't know if this was supposed to be kind of a leaving feeling, I was so angry because the clients that come into the sanctuary, and the piece does not shy away from anything. It deals with trigger warning, domestic violence. It deals with abortion. It deals with rape. Like there's so many
Yeah.
heavy-handed
The broad sort of spectrum of
themes.
women's issues that they would need this kind of
Yes.
help from their feminist community. Yeah.
Yes. And the characters sing about this, or they are rawly expressing about this, like laying on the apothecary table or slumped over a chair. Like there is these stark images that go with these women's stories. There's only so much that Tilly and Lady can do. And I understand that as a concept, but at the end of the piece, I was so angry because I was like, this piece could have ended as in, you know what? We're not supposed to do this, but let's find a way to make it happen for them and bake it into their era so that it's going to be okay. So, like, if
Yeah.
it means like done behind closed doors, or if it means like masking in a way that goes within the era that they belong to, but just so that these women can actually leave and maybe be the only woman in their lifetime that is saved or that is helped accordingly. But they don't. Like, Tilly doesn't take that step forward,
Yeah.
or Lady and Tilly don't. And I get it that to me, there is sort of like this fictitious, like, hero element to kind of cap out the story that I'm describing right now, but
I
it
could
just, yeah, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead,
No, because like I had a very similar gripe with it, and well, because it essentially like I'll go even further than kind of how you described it. Like there is what I would call a kind of conservative undercurrent beneath this piece that is so girl power, rah rah feminism throughout history, but the lesson that Tilly has to learn is that, oh yeah, you really shouldn't mess with time or do anything radical that could actually have a material impact on these women's lives because you don't know the consequences. And I like what you were saying earlier about how like, oh yeah, this sort of like, I don't know if code switching is like the right word for it, but like the way that you kind of like have to communicate with certain women a certain way to kind of like understand. That's like kind of an interesting metaphor. But I was like, I feel like we're getting too hung up on like the time travel ethics Marty McFly business like here
mm,
about like, oh, the real journey isn't about like how do we help these women? It's about how do you do so in a way that obeys the rules after all.
yeah.
And like to me that just doesn't feel radical, even though there's a song called Radical like in this show. Yeah, sorry, I have
And
more, but please.
I thought at the very last second,
Mhm.
when there was like the beautiful like candles placed in the shelves,
Yeah.
I thought like visually we were going to get that switch. Like it was going to be like Tilly had to play along with Lady's story of what the sanctuary is. And then by these like shining candle lights or something, I thought there was going to be a last powerful moment of like, and I'm going to do things differently,
Yeah.
blackout or
No.
something, or
The
like, and now let's be radical, blackout. I just wanted there to be a
but
turn, just so
but
like just
but but the lesson she learns is, oh wow, yes, I have made mistakes because I tried to push the envelope too much, and I will be a better version of this role because I'm learning how not to push that envelope.
and
And
then
the
yeah.
sorry, you want to finish?
Well, I'm just saying, I wonder if that is supposed to be this like pressure cooker feeling we're supposed to feel of like we still live in society where obeying the rules or staying underneath a thumb is like
I
how to
like
get by. But I'm like,
to
we gotta push.
But to me, like yeah, like this is why I kind of say it feels like it has an unintentionally conservative undercurrent to it, because yeah, like when the big thing that this is the one that I was very perturbed by watching it is that we have a character, Eleanor was her name, whose husband is presumably abusing her. Like she comes into the shop with bruises, and Tilly, who's also come out of an abusive relationship, recognizes the signs right away. And
Mhm.
then this woman is like buying these candles that have some kind of like poison and it like, oh, don't mind me, I'm just buying candles, also my husband's abusing me, bye. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of until he like understanding what's going on helps her out and gives her the candles. And then near the end, the man, Eleanor's husband, comes into the shop and he's like keeling over. He's like, "Oh, I'm horribly sick. Please help me." Until he's like, "Oh, I know all about you. Do. You know, you deserve exactly what you're getting." And then he tells a very different story about what's going
Hmm.
on than the one that Eleanor gave us. And it kind of implies that Eleanor, if not necessarily like lying about the abuse, certainly is just as much of an abuser as her husband may or may
Yes.
not. And to me, I really didn't like this because it kind of sends the audience home and, well, Tilly and by extension the audience with the lesson of maybe you don't believe victims of when they come forward and tell you things, or maybe there's more to the story and you really should take the man's side just as much. And like there's a
Yeah.
time and a place for that maybe sometimes, but I don't think this is it in this kind of like saving women from the violence of history kind of story. And it's all done for the purpose of teaching Tilly the lesson that her 20th or maybe even 21st century radical ideals aren't always going to properly read these situations and then shouldn't
Mhm.
take justice into her own hands how she sees it to assess each situation on its own terms within its own historical context. Again, it doesn't feel very radical when it favors the side of don't believe the victim, the female victim of this abusive situation. Am
Yeah.
I misreading that? Like, I
No,
hope
no,
I
no.
am,
I
but
felt a bit off kilter when the husband actually entered the space too.
speaking of irksome things, there's a kind of, let's call it somewhat transgender character plot line in a way where specifically one of the characters, I forget what her name was.
Oh,
Do you have it handy?
Francis. It's Francis.
Francis, played by
Callan Forrester.
okay, apologies if we haven't been shouting out all the actors' names with each of these characters we name. This character is a lesbian. Like she's fallen in love with a
Mhm.
woman, but she's married to a man, and like just she comes to the apothecary shop to like cure me of the thing that's wrong with me. And a really great song. She sings the "Why am I like this? Why do I like this?"
Yeah.
It's a bop. I love it. But
Yes. So
as
good.
a piece of music, I love it. But their solution, again, playing within their sort of seemingly arbitrary time travel rules, or perhaps not arbitrary, but needlessly restrictive time travel rules, we can solve this issue by having you disguise yourself as a man and live your life as a man so you can be with the woman you love. That would be interesting and compelling if that was Francis's desire. That like not just why am I like this attractive women, but why do I feel more like a man in my inner essence and like and that's sort of this love I have for women is maybe an extension of that. But because it's sort of like presented as like here's the fix, we're gonna force you to transition. So because lesbianism isn't
Oh,
approved,
oh no, no, no.
uh,
That's just how what was done in that time period.
yeah, like
Women would just dress up like men, and
yeah.
I don't think transgender has
Well,
anything to do with that
but that's
line.
the I think it kind of accidentally does is maybe like where I'm going with this because there's also like this kind of Lady and Tilly, or more so Lady, I think, kind of, I won't say scold, but sort of like give Francis this sort of like, but just so you know, you'll always be hiding and you can never be yourself. And like,
But I think that's a commentary on, yeah, that's how that was back then. I
oh,
thought there was a little bit of like taking out of the piece that that lady was giving us there of like, this is what would be said back then. And like, look at back then, how Francis would have had to live.
okay. I don't know. Something about it seems off. This doesn't feel like a play that is written today. Probably because it feels the need to play by these old-timey rules and at every turn vindicates the old-timey rules.
Mm,
And that's
interesting.
like what I'm saying, like about sort of the abuse situation, or the fact that Tilly's big lesson is don't be radical, learn to play within the system. It just, as much as I like the music and I think the premise is clever, something about this play just constantly kind of rubbed me the wrong way and feels like
Mm.
it's almost undercutting the points that it's trying to make, even if you can kind of trace a logically consistent current with each one within the show. I kind of just want to like ask the writers, but like, but what do you believe? And is that what's actually being reflected in the show? Because I think you're more radical than the piece of art you created. And if you're kind of making something that's less radical than you yourself are and your beliefs are, then what is this adding to the discourse around these
Hmm.
subjects? That's kind of
Interesting.
my
Yeah.
take on it. I don't know. Maybe I'll come to different conclusions, but like it's been like over a week since I saw it, and like this is what's been simmering
Yeah.
this whole time, I guess.
I think we've already mentioned too, the score of this piece is an absolute
Chef's kiss.
banger.
I would listen to this album all the time if they had one. Yeah.
I'm going to do a fringe performer shout out
Mhm.
that anybody listening who is an agent or a producer,
Mm.
this is your person. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, but Ayokunmi Aladesu, who played
Mhm.
Henny, I believe is the character.
Penny with a P.
Penny. Wow, folks. This performer is phenomenal.
Oh yeah, very.
Vocally, some of the best singing I have heard in 2025.
Well,
Very healthy, very grounded, very like age and era specific, effortless, and their performance of basically, spoiler alert, their character is recently married and gets pregnant like the first time having intercourse with her husband and doesn't know if she wants the baby or not, doesn't know if she's ready. And she's the character that actually undergoes a very treacherous like abortion in her era that Tilly and Lady kind of misprescribed to her in a way. And the pain, I don't even know how to do due diligence to explain this, but there's an image that is burned in my brain, tipping the hat to Cass, our director, who staged it
Cass
this
Van
way.
Wyck, who I don't know if we've named
Yes,
yet.
yes, Cass Van Wyck. But having Penny lay on the table after having the botched surgery and looking out at the audience and just seeing the lifelessness of self, of the trauma that she just endured, also being a person of color back in that era. And sort of you get a little bit of history of how like women of color getting an abortion versus white women getting an abortion during her era would have been very different and treated very different. And just to see her laying there raw and describing, even in very little description, you saw the whole experience. It just in the way that Hayao like acted out. It just, yeah, I'm speechless because it was so
She
good.
was excellent. Yes. Very good.
And just the also, I'm a huge stickler of endowing pain and like it making sure if your character has gone through something physically, how are you showcasing that on stage or like physically or age or whatever. I look at that and just her body and how she was carrying herself and how Tilly had to help her to the back. The ache and the pain was exactly what the story was. And yeah, just absolutely a phenomenal performer. They will probably get my performer shout out for the treading the Toronto Fringe 2025 boards.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Should we leave it?
Yeah, I think we've got a little, that's a good note to end on. And I'm sorry if we've been a bit of a downer on this one as a whole, but yes, excellent performance there. And whole cast was very strong too. I don't want
Yes.
to, yes, discount anyone
And
else
like I said,
either.
the exchange of like womanhood and questioning that the characters do with each other is lovely. Like I was teary throughout the piece too, because like I said, as much as we're frustrated by how this piece ends, there is a little bit of a like that feeling that way is purposeful too, because there is still the struggle and there is still so many unanswered questions with women. We are still living in a world that is built by and for men. And so I think there is some, like I said, due diligence to how the piece concludes and how we feel. I just think I just wanted, maybe it's the radical in me, I just wanted a little bit of a like, what happens if we turn the fire a little bit, you know? But
yeah.
anyways.
This piece could stand to be a little more radical, despite what its lyrics would suggest. I think it's trying to be. I don't know. There's room to work within. I think the politics and the messaging and the themes around what is a very strong concept.
Yeah, and I loved all of the characters we were introduced to. However, I don't think you need all of them.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
think there were some stronger, more poignant stories that I honestly think you only maybe need about 3 or 4 clients instead of like the plethora of women that they did have.
I also felt like we could have had more double casting, but I think they wanted to have that big group number close to the end where the real apothecary is the friends we made along the way, kind
Yeah.
of, you know, the large community and network of women throughout time and representing all these different periods. But some of them, like, aside from that last scene, didn't even like get a song of their own and like only showed up in like one scene prior. And like that wasn't even the last scene because there's like other stuff that comes. But yeah, I think they were all there for the benefit of just having that big group number. But I think you're right that character wise, unless you're going to give each one their own song. I think that's a grounds upon which you can axe one of those characters or at least double them with an actor in a different scene.
Okay, so let's close the book on Apothecary for now, ooh, which is actually punny because there is the book
Yeah,
that
that falls
gets
from the
dropped into the
sky. Yeah.
space. And let's pivot to our next production, which is Alpha. Naparima College Drama Club is the company listed there. And this is a production that Ryan saw. So, Ryan, give us a spiel of Alpha and let's talk about it.
Okay. Alpha was definitely a highlight from this year's Fringe. This is a really just stunning production and done by like I think these are like actual high schoolers from Trinidad and Tobago, which is amazing. Like just
Yeah,
this cast. So that's five main actors and like a few other smaller, mostly non-speaking roles, and then like one teacher character who comes in at the end. But for the most part, it's five main cast members who are students at this prestigious all boys high school. First off, before I even get into like the story and like what's actually happening here, they had a very well done subtitling convention here or transcription convention where there was this screen off to the side that because like these characters they're speaking like in their own dialect, it is like a thick accent with a lot of slang in it that might be jarring and hard to follow for just mainline Canadian audiences. They had not just like the actual like closed captioning of what they're saying there, but it was like color coded for like each of the actors that like their lines on
nice.
there. And when because characters play or actors play multiple different characters in ways that I'll describe soon, that color coding was like really helpful at like following who was being who in the moment. And there was like
Cool.
annotations in this captioning about like if there was a Caribbean slang word that like maybe we don't know or wouldn't be familiar with, there was like an asterisk next to it, and then that like showed up like with a translation. Like this is like cutting edge as
Nice.
far as like yeah captioning goes in theater. Like the producers take notes because it's really interesting. Unfortunately, it's kind of like positioned way off to the side. I think it's maybe just like a limitations of the space. It was in the Michael Young Theater at Soul Pepper. And it was also kind of had like this like bars sort of like blocking some of the screen, which is unfortunate when the screen is like so
Mm,
uh, well thought through that limitations of the space did hamper that, but I don't fault them for it because they clearly did put so much thought into this. So we have these five students who are hanging around their classroom waiting for class to start. And the big topic of conversation is around one of their classmates who they refer to simply as Alpha. We don't know what if that's like his actual name or what his proper name is, but they all just call him Alpha. And this guy seems to be the coolest kid in their school. He's really impressive socially. He gets all the ladies. He's a charmer. Everybody likes him, and his classmates like all admire the hell out of him. He's very skilled in Kalinda, which is a type of ritual stick fighting.
mhm.
And we get this one scene in the play where we see like this stick fighting done with their neckties used as the sticks by like Captain's Ritual.
Whoa,
Phenomenal, like choreography was just like
cool.
so cool to watch. But so they're all talking about this Alpha who's not here, and they're like, well, what's going on with Alpha? Does anybody know? And they're like kind of like reminiscing about things with Alpha, and they keep sort of reenacting these kind of stories or memories, or maybe even imagining what they think sort of things happened with Alpha. And some of them are like him flirting with girls, some are like his family home life, and we get a kind of window into like what's going on with this character.
Hmm.
It is eventually revealed. Part of me thinks that maybe I missed that this was revealed earlier because they don't hide this as like a spoiler in like the description blurb of like what the show is, but me not potentially not catching it earlier felt like a surprise to me when we finally got this revelation
Hmm.
is that Alpha's been arrested and suspended from school on a rape charge. Yes, and obviously content warning for this kind of discussion, but
Hmm.
this kid who's admired by all of his male classmates as like the coolest guy who's so good with the ladies and so good at everything. There's a seedy undercurrent of toxic masculinity bubbling underneath this object of admiration that is this figure. There's one, while they don't actually like show any kind of like explicit sexual violence on stage, and it is with an all male cast, but there is in the kind of reenacting and reimagining of all of these scenes, there is like one scene where they do show what is presumably what led to that charge, where he's really aggressively not taking no for an answer while female victim of this is played by another one of the boys, while one of the boys plays alpha in this situation, and they all take turns playing alpha and playing the various people in these memories or imaginings. Like, it is really unflinchingly brutal, even without actually depicting the act itself. So
Right.
this is a story about what does it mean to be the alpha male. And I don't actually know, maybe you know better than I do about what the generational lines between when does Gen Z end and when Gen Alpha begins. Are current high schoolers still Gen Z?
I don't know, actually, to be
Yeah,
honest.
because if
I'm that
so,
old now that I'm like, what are
yes.
the kids these days?
I'm still a millennial, so yeah, I don't know anything. But if these kids also fit within Generation Alpha, as it's being called, then that's an additional connotation about like, well, what does this mean for are the kids all right? Boys will be boys, but should they be? And this is very much what the story is meditating on, and it
Right.
does it in such a deft, careful, thoughtful, theatrically exhilarating way. Like again, there's a stick fighting scene with neckties in this. Like it's
I'm
fantastic.
so sad that I
Yeah.
missed
Well, I
this
know you
because
really
I
wanted to see it,
feel,
and
yeah,
yeah, even just like on the description alone, yeah, this was truly stunning. And like we do get like I'm going to spoil it because I don't imagine they're going to perform this again in Toronto anytime soon, but it kind of just ends with like the teacher comes in and this was the moment where even if you sort of like think you were figuring stuff out earlier, the teacher kind of just says like, yes, as you all know, Alpha has been, arrested on these rape charges, but we all know Alpha, we all love him. Clearly this must be a mistake. He'll be okay. He'll get out just fine, surely. And then, yeah, so that you kind of are like left hanging with that thought of like, oh, he probably will not indeed face repercussions for this. And we also do get some insight into like, this isn't just an alpha problem, like this individual student, but it represents a larger sort of like system of cycles of violence and home life and everything, and just like the way that Alpha's behaviors are celebrated within his peer group. And then the very last moment of this play is after the teacher kind of just like says this thing about like, oh, but don't worry, he'll probably be okay, which gives us all the more reason to worry. He then does a roll call for the students, and each of the student actors who we've been seeing says their real proper name as almost like a roll credits at the end of it, but it kind of completely shatters this line between the fact and the fiction that we've kind of been following, the sort of like fictions within fictions that we've been following, to be like, yes, these are real people. Whether or not this is a true story in the true sense, there is definitely truth to it. And these very thoughtful, brave, talented performers are, I think, breaking this cycle by telling this story in this way, and
wow.
to confront us with who they are as their true selves in this way is a very powerful moment to end on. I
Ooh,
will also
I
mention
have
because
goosebumps and I'm
yeah,
getting teary.
yeah, you didn't
Whew.
even see it. I'm just trying to like keep my composure, like describing it. I will say I didn't actually know this going in, or I didn't like remember this from the blurb if I did encounter this, but this is actually based on a pre-existing play called The Ritual by Zeno Constance. This isn't a play I was familiar with, but I think that just uses that same sort of like students talking about another student and reenacting these things. And I don't know, having not like read into this other play, like I don't know the extent to which those similarities begin or end, but I think more than anything, the doing this specifically in a Trini context is like the big
Mhm.
innovation of like what makes alpha alpha in terms of what this show is. But I could be wrong, and there could be a lot more lines of demarcation that I am unaware of. Anyway, that's kind of alpha in a nutshell. Any questions about alpha?
Do you think and you kind of are already pressing on this, but I'm just wondering too. So yes, you talked about like Alpha being from like this is obviously the name of the character,
Mhm.
and there's just the symbolism too, like you said, of the boys on stage, like revering this
Mhm.
peer as an alpha. And then like you talked about Generation Alpha. Do you also think there were just themes of sort of what being like alpha male, especially
Oh yeah.
in a Caribbean sort of like diaspora and generational, like that was sussed to the surface through this as well?
Oh, I think I'm sorry if I didn't say that earlier, but
No,
yeah, I
you
think
didn't.
that's the
You were
first and
pressing
foremost.
on it, but
Yeah.
I feel I want to like I want
Yes.
to
Yeah,
sift it to the
this
top.
is a
Yeah.
play about what does it mean to be an alpha male, and is that something we should be desiring or celebrating, and what violence does that label not just entail but excuse? That to be the alpha male means getting off scot-free because, well, that's just what it means to be the big man on campus, the top dog, the one who we all naturally get in line behind because he is, by virtue
Mhm.
of his hypermasculine sexual aggression, he is the one we all look up to. And shouldn't we admire the alpha wolf, which is a theory based on fake wolf science that's been debunked that wolves don't actually structure their societies in that way? Anyway, that's a whole separate point, but
With that too, was there like a pendulum swing of like what you just said, but also in did this piece create sort of like with it being such a youthful cast as well, a space or a meditation on, you can be labeled as this, but there is like accountability, or there is a reframing, or maybe even like a softness to that label. Like was
to the
that
label
kind
of
of
alpha. I wouldn't say that it
or
necessarily models like an alternative way to be the alpha. Like
mhm.
it's that's not necessarily like what it's invested in. It's more deconstructing the
Right. Or,
grandiosity
or
of the
maybe
alpha.
bringing to light of like how much of the stereotypical alpha is placed upon a person due to like society, or due
Mhm.
to generational trauma, or due to and how are we looking at it, maybe because I just the way you're describing it too, of this alpha being a peer to
Mhm.
the people that are like, to me in a theatrical lens, maybe it's showing that like this alpha is a human, is a friend,
Yes, yes, and we
is a peer,
mhm.
but and it's but thrown in the context of what this character is being charged with. It seems like, yeah, the piece is
Like
kind of looking at this
yeah,
in,
this it does humanize Alpha, even though that
yeah.
character as a discrete character never exists on stage, but each of the other boys takes a turn embodying him in one of the other scenes.
Mm.
He he kind of yeah,
Oh,
this
that's neat. Wait, sorry to
yeah,
stop on that for a second. So
sure.
each of the boys sort of plays
Yeah.
alpha.
It's actually kind of well very similar to the show
That's
that you're
astonishing to me.
it's
Wow.
also
Okay.
in a way it's kind of similar to the show that you're currently doing at Hamilton Fringe right
Okay.
now, that where characters are telling a story and imagining how the story would go and then take turns reenacting it. That's 500 doubloons if anybody wants to see
Yeah,
that
if
at
anyone
Hamilton
wants to
Fringe.
see it,
If
Hamilton.
this comes out if the episode comes out in time for that to even be doable,
Yeah.
which but which I saw this afternoon and it was fun. So yeah, like so they kind of they in that sort of like quasi Rashomon structure, they sort of each take a turn being alpha, which is on one
Mm,
sense like the what they aspire to be, but they're also often unflinching portrayals, like the one very brutal scene that I mentioned earlier of like they're not necessarily not at least not in all of the scenes are they glorifying their vision of who alpha is. But to your kind of earlier question, I think this isn't a play about Alpha is a bad individual person who must be canceled and excised from
yeah.
the community. It is about, yeah, the cycles, the how does one become this? Why is this something that is celebrated? And
Wow.
if these personality traits continue to be celebrated in this way and are not given social consequences or different kind of rearing that prevents them, that these kinds of heinous crimes are just the, if not inevitable outcome, the likely result of a scenario that holds this particular type of masculinity up as not just something to be desired, but the ideal of what is to be desired of young
Right.
men and boys. To the fact that even the teacher, who should be this voice of authority, comes in and be like, oh, well, we all love Alpha. He probably didn't do it. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, and yeah, he'll be back, and there will hopefully be no consequences for these actions. So
Hmm.
yeah, that was Alpha. Fantastic show. If this ever
Great.
does come back, I'd highly encourage people to see this.
Yeah, I'm so sad I missed it. Okay, so the last show that we're going to be discussing in Toronto Fringe 2025 Part 2. Again, thank you so much for stringing along with us as we kind of had brief little intermissions, fire alarms, disheveled hair, Gatorade. We are capping this episode out with Zeitgeist, and this is an off the nose production. I saw this. Ryan also saw this, but Ryan dramaturged this piece.
Yeah.
So he will be making slight comments here and there to my sort of unpacking, because as we usually like to do on these episodes, if we are involved either as performer or something on the production side, we refrain from contributing
Yeah.
dialogue. So
I think
yeah,
dialogue is fine, but like I cannot review this show. I was too involved in it for too
correct.
long over a multi-year development process. Granted, I wasn't directly involved with this production of it that happened at Fringe. Like my last involvement, like the last version of the script I saw is like over a year ago prior to this iteration that appeared on stage. But I think I am too close to this piece that I will not review, but I'm happy to chime in with commentary where there's maybe context that I could provide. But more than anything, I have my thoughts about the show, but I want to hear yours as somebody who's encountering it for the first time.
So one of my favorite pieces of Fringe.
Mine too, but I'm biased.
Yeah, and also like shout out to Ben, to Ethan, folks that I've met through Ryan, but they're very talented performer friends. Ethan is a performer, is one of our protagonists in this, and then Ben was the writer and director. Okay, so this piece also just like personally, I'm gonna gush because it strings together so many beautiful like theatrical elements, but also cinematic elements, but also love elements that speak to me and my heart and my soul. Quirky, yeah, there's just everything going on. So let's just do a summary first. So it's a group of, well, it ends up being a group of friends, but basically the piece starts with this couple or these people, woman and a man, meeting at like an art space. They have a conversation, they're hitting it off. It is like a meet cute, awkward conversation that they have. She invites him back to a party at her place. He meets her friends, which are four very different zany individuals. They all have their own stories. They all have their own relationships with each other, relationships with substance, relationships with the times. Again, our protagonists have their little meet cute relationship. But then as we go to this party, you see a bunch of 20 somethings in 2025 trying to figure out the world, trying to figure out their lives, trying to figure out their love, trying to figure out, do I want to smoke weed or drink the huge? All of this is done in Cinecycle, which is this little venue in like an alley on Spadina where it's like a bicycle shop movie theater thing. Mm-hmm. So the piece is done in an alleyway. There's like limited seating. And then there's the projector, which we have sort of chapter subtitles projected on the screen taking us through the piece. And also the projector is used to pop some like sort of almost like dooming apocalyptic phrases at the beginning. And it's also used to show movie clips that are the pulse point of this relationship between our protagonists, Caroline and Anders. And they're like epic, classic movie scenes. Like I literally sat there, I was like, Ben, you are my hero because you're literally playing every scene that I sink my teeth and my heartstrings into of these movies. I'm talking all over the map here. Basically, a constant sort of, again, I've said pulse point a lot, but that's just how I'm going through this, is the Before series. So if anyone's seen like I think it's a trilogy, right?
Yeah,
There's three of the Ethan Hawkes.
Yeah.
Where it's like the couple that like meets and they have like these large like philosophical and like existential conversations before they disperse off into the world. And then their paths meet. What do they talk about? How do they talk? The love and romantic in me is like, this is thing. These are like, yes, this is what we're put on this earth for, is to be these like rich, unique human beings and be in connection with each other and then like float away but come back. So Caroline and Anders, like I said, they meet, they go to this party, and then you find out Caroline is leaving for Germany the next day. And so the party goes on. I'll get into all the little character antics in a moment. Caroline and Anders sort of share the night together. They sleep together. And then they are waiting for Caroline to get brought to the airport the next day. And you think that it's just going to be like, you know what? Like, this was a lovely flash in the pan, 24 hours. But like, it's going to, and I'm sitting there being like, it doesn't just have to be 24 hours. This doesn't have to be a La La Land.
Well, in the movie Before Sunrise, it is. Like, they don't exchange numbers, and that's part of the beautiful poignancy of it.
But this one, they exchange numbers. We turn the fire up, we flip the switch, and I was like, yes. And so such a romantic and a gush. And so yeah, they exchange numbers. So like even though she's going to Germany, they're still gonna be in contact. And in my brain, I'm like, ooh, he can visit. But okay, so that's kind of like a shell of everything. Going back to the party situation. So you meet all of Caroline's like roommates and friends, and you're exposed to two of them were exes, and there was like a giant like ghosting period that they went through. Again, a lot of the themes that are brought to the surface in this are very much giving like this generation 20 somethings in 2025. So
It's
we've
the
got like
zeitgeist.
exactly the couples that are ghosting or that have been ghosted and now they're brought back together and they still have residual feelings for each other, and you find out she was pregnant, but then that's a whole thing that they waded through. Then there's like another friendship, like both queer friends that are like have each other's back quite literally in the staging. They're leaning each other's back
Yeah.
at one point. And we sort of get a scope into their individual sort of take on like love and life. And through all of this, Ben, our director writer, I feel like did a really good job of giving each of these characters, even though like Caroline and Anders are our protagonists, each of the side characters, like they have their moment of like either it being like a monologue or reading a passage of poetry or something where we get to see their sort of budding of what is life, love, and relationship that we're kind of seeing in action through like Caroline and Anders, but we see sort of that hope or despair in all the other characters too. So the B track and the A track of this piece were just as juicy. The one wasn't sort of pulling weight over the other. And then what I also loved about this is all of these characters like cracking open, reading pieces of political text or like massive swaths of poetry. You just have them getting absolutely baked and drunk out of their mind. And like it's shown through like a movement, almost like contact improv contemporary dance piece, where they're all sort of like morphing together into each other, dancing, partying, and then each one pops out and has like this like very like stretching, almost sometimes like animalistic, sometimes like escaping, sometimes graceful, like maybe kind of talking back to mutual aim of like these individual bodies all together and then popping out, coming back together. Like that was a wonderful use of movement in this piece.
I'll say that the choreography was done by Ali Carey, who also did the choreography for Iris Says Goodbye.
Amazing. Tipping the hat to Allie there. Yeah. And I just thought also like the use of the space, very minimalist set. Like I said, it was done in alleyway. There was like an ottoman that kind of came center stage to be Caroline's bed, to be kind of like a couch in an art gallery. All of the actors kind of used the actual photographs or pictures that were in Cinecycle to be, like I said, to be the art gallery or to be like the lived in apartment space. Mm-hmm. There was like a bar at the one point. The characters were kind of interacting behind and around. There was a couch that again just absolutely exuded the couch in their apartment. Very beautifully done, tied with a bow. The book is phenomenal. Everyone was a standout. This entire cast was so rich and very, very well casted. Yeah. Do you want to say anything or like what do you?
I'm loving hearing just like everything you're saying, and like yes, you're capturing the essence of it very well. One thing that I'll just say that's like, it's not like me reviewing the performance or any way, but like over 3 years ago, like when I read like maybe about 3 years ago, hard to say, time is weird, especially post-pandemic time. This moment, the present, what does it mean?
Yeah.
But when I read the very first draft that I saw, which already was like a few drafts in of Ben working on it, and I liked it a lot, and I thought like it had a lot of really good things going for it. But I think something that I said to Ben at the time was like, I think this is like a really strong piece. It's raising interesting ideas, bringing stuff together. People will leave it pleased, but I don't know if it's going to change anybody's life. That was my reaction to the first draft of it I read. And I kind of kept reminding myself of that initial appraisal with each subsequent draft and seeing it get progressively better and stronger and tighter with each version. That again, like about a year ago, the last version of it that I read before this Fringe production was necessarily a given that it was going to happen, I went back to Ben and like, I think this might change some people's lives. Like you have
Yeah,
written
definitely.
something that like has gotten so sharp and so thoughtful and so poignant that like not everybody, I think this play is an acquired taste. While I have been
Mhm.
honestly like quite surprised at how overwhelmingly positive so much of the reception has been, I could completely understand why some people might not groove with what this piece is doing, or kind of have maybe some issues with the way that it handles like the subject matter of the material, or maybe you just find the characters tedious and that's okay too. I can imagine how some might. But this really did come over the course of the long development, and it was a very long development of this piece. It has been really like truly like remarkable seeing just how well this piece has been received, how
Mhm.
people have been raving about this like all throughout the Fringe. Like so many people bring it up when you ask like what's one of the best or favorite things you've seen, what do you recommend, believe the hype. Like people really have been having very strong feelings about the show, as you've attested to here, as all of these other reviews had. And yeah, like it's this piece that I will admit, like I had that slight skepticism of when I first encountered it. Ben is such a, he's sort of like the perfect playwright for this kind of thing. Like one, like this is like very much a him story that he does. Like it's so kind of like it's personal to him in a lot of ways, and like these characters talk in much the way he does, and
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
kind of like feel that like personal flair in it. But like he's just such a great writer to work with as a dramaturg, because like he's not precious about anything. Like he rewrites so well. He'll kind of like junk things and kind of like reconstruct. I remember there was one moment. Do you remember like over a year ago there was like a submarine exploded, and like that was like a big news story for like a few days.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
we had one of our workshops for this like a day or two after that happened, and he had already written in a conversation about that didn't make it into
Nice.
this final version. But
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I remember like thinking like, oh my God, like this is a play about the zeitgeist, literally the spirit of our present time. And
Yeah.
like I thought like what a cool dramaturgical idea to just like take most recent big news story and put it into the
Yeah.
characters' mouths. Like this is no, we didn't have anything quite that immediate in terms of this final version here, because
I
how
mean, you
routine.
did have the Spadina streetcar not working again, which was a
True, but
funny little
that's
quip.
kind of just always. And it
Yeah.
was the King Streetcar was the one that gave us a lot of
Oh yeah,
problems
true,
during
true, true,
Fringe,
true.
more so
Yeah,
than the
yeah.
Spadina one. But
That's true.
yes, but like there's just that idea of like, wow, yeah, just writing in something like so topical that way. Like, yeah, again, it has been truly a dramaturg's delight being involved in this process to whatever
Mhm.
extent I was, however sporadically it was throughout. Also, Asenia Lyle, who was the director of Quiltro, was also one of the dramaturgs. Like she and I both worked with Ben at various
Cool.
points on it and were involved in these workshops. It's been a long time
Yeah, it's
coming, and I was
great.
so happy to finally see it get up and see how impactful it has been for so many people.
And I believe, was it Elena Milo who played Caroline?
Yes.
Yeah, and then Ethan Zucklin, like again, everyone was such a standout, but I just want to talk about them for a little bit because I might get teary too. I just feel like they did such a good job of like quirkily like taking it like the before series, like it's lovely, but it's like it's Ethan Hawke. So he's like saying all these things. And it is kind of
He has like
fancified in a
yeah,
way.
he's got like a
There is a
quirky
quirk.
charm.
There is a quirk, but there is that like layer, that blanket of cinema. And it was just lovely seeing that type of story, that type of relationship in a live theater lens. Because obviously, like it's a love story. Like love stories have existed on stages forever. But I feel like often we see like it was I would love to like sit down with Ben too and really discuss like his relationship to film because he's
Oh yeah,
obviously like a
that's a huge.
huge film junkie. Like I
Mhm.
guess as his dramaturg,
Yeah.
you probably know that about him.
But
But like
it's on
again,
display in the like we have
yeah,
clips
the
of all these
clip
coming of
is
age
so
movies.
specific
Yeah.
too, like in very lovely cuts. And so like Ben, yeah. But so to take those like cinematic tropes and then bring them into a theater lens, it's like a huge task. And like I just think that through the direction and the performance of Elena and Ethan, like it was so authentic and quirky and real and like similar to that feeling when you watch the big screen and you have those epic love moments or meet cutes or relationship or I'll have what she's having. Like you sit there as the audience, especially a romantic audience member, and you're like, I want that, or like only in the movies
You'd
or
want what she's
whatever.
having.
Right, right. Only in the movies or something, whatever, right? And then to see it like in live time, I was like, again, I kept getting like teary because it's like, oh my gosh, this is so like like I said, the authenticity is there, and it's bringing to life sort of like this feeling of, I'll have what they're having. Like I want what they're having, and it just like you could see the audience too, us being an alleyway, which I love that setup of performance always because you're spectating the spectators too. And so everyone had that like grin to grin when they had their quirky quips or their like, that these souls are supposed to dance. They're supposed to be in each other's lives, whether it be just for one night or it be finalized by exchanging numbers. So
Which isn't even necessarily final. It just promises that
yeah.
there is a next step that could have been robbed from them. We don't know. This might peter out entirely after a week, but we have
Yes,
this
but that's
beautiful
a
moment
very
together.
pessimistic way of looking at it. Okay. I'm like, these souls are meant to be together, and we have technology nowadays to make that happen. I feel like I've kind of, in a roundabout way, spoken them up, but again, Ethan and Elena, I feel like their chemistry was phenomenal, and their individuality and uniqueness to these characters was off the charts. And again, taking it into the lens of this generation, like 20 something Torontonians in 2025, not like hunky middle-aged Ethan Hawke, like trying to, you know what I mean? Like it just kind of
I don't think he
I don't
was
know.
middle aged
He
when that
was
movie
that
came out.
old,
The
but
first one.
it's still like
He was
there
probably like in
is
his
like
early 20s.
there's a prowess that's like put on when it's like you're watching these themes on screen. Whereas like in like this alleyway cinecycle space where it's super hot in here and it's like we're literally hearing sirens and the Toronto streetcar go by. This story exists in the now.
On
Yeah.
that point, like the title Zeitgeist, the spirit of the
Yes.
time. This was a recurring conversation that we were having during the development process of this, and I'm curious now that you've seen the finished product without all of that baggage, what your take on it is. Because on one hand, yes, this is a script that's really trying to tap into the present moment of what does it feel like to be a young person right now. But at the same time, there is this kind of gesture throughout the piece to a longer time scale and not just the now. The fact that we have like all of these clips from movies, some of them are many decades old. Like I think like certainly the oldest one I can think of is like The Graduate is one of the
Yep.
movies
Yep.
that shows up in this. That's like the 1960s. When you think of it in that way, like it's less saying that like oh this is how it feels to be young now. It's like this is maybe how it's always just felt to be young, and that there isn't something necessarily situated in our time. And the fact that we have the character of Cameron played by Nicholas Eddy in this has this monologue from
Mhm.
Rilke's Letter to a Young Poet that expresses
Yeah.
these same ideas about what it's like to be young and passionate and want to create art. That's like over 100 years old.
Yeah.
So this was a recurring conversation in the development process. Like, how much do you, Ben, as the playwright, want this to be about the now? And how much is it about, well, this is how it's always been? Is it about the now? And I'm
Yeah.
curious what take you have on it, having come out of the piece without having seen those discussions prior.
I think there is, as much as I keep saying like, oh, look it very much is. Yeah. The spirit of the now, it's bringing this generation, center stage, no pun intended. I think there absolutely is a timelessness to this. And that I think we get that through those, like you said, decades old cinema clips, through the passages that are read out by the characters, even the way that the characters sort of trance out and give us their sort of takes or monologues on things sound a bit more heightened language than what the kids say these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely do think there's a brilliance of it's both things are happening at the same time. There's a timelessness, but then there's also an of the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
well said. Any last thoughts, or shall we close part
I
two
think
there?
that should be our time with
Mhm.
this Toronto Fringe 2025 Part 2 episode. We still have Toronto Fringe 2025 Part 3 episode coming down the line where you will get the three of us on that episode. So you've had Ryan and Mac, you have myself and Ryan, and then you will have me, Mac, and Ryan rounding out Part 3 down the line. I've said it before. I love Fringe because we get all these pieces. We talked about so many different genres today. We talked about so many different stories. We talked about maybe next steps for pieces. We talked about break a leg on your next step with this piece. I'm just leaving this episode very excited and very grateful to be surrounded by such phenomenal art and community in the city and beyond. So yeah, that's kind of where I want to
Tip the Fringe,
cap out.
folks.
Tip the Fringe. Perfect. So, Ryan, where can folks find and follow you?
No need to find and follow me personally, but if you like me and my theater thoughts, many of them tend to live here on the Cup. That's Cup of Hemlock Theatre on YouTube, Cup of Hemlock Theatre podcast in all the podcast places, at COH Theatre on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want more of my theater thoughts, many of them get published these days by Next Magazine, including some Fringe stuff that I did there. I also wrote article about Fringe clowns for intermission that came out right before the festival. So tune into all of the Fringe content from moi outside of this very long episode that you just listened to, and another one to come, and another one before that. How about you, Jill? Where can people find and follow you?
Nice. Speaking of Fringe, I will plug my Fringe. People can find and follow me at my artist Instagram account, which is jillian.robinson96. And as Ryan plugged halfway through the episode, I am currently in a production at Hamilton Fringe. It's called 500 Doubloons. It is a phenomenal little piratey romp, a bunch of actors taking on characters. It's genre roulette. It's a fun time.
It's the alpha of pirate plays.
Yeah, I wear a corset the entire show, which has been a dream of mine. I endow Laura Croft, which is a dream of mine. I have there's a Pride and Prejudice scene, which is a dream of mine. It's been a dream to be a part of this team. So if this episode comes out prior to the 27th of July, come on out to Fringe in Hamilton.
I think it will, but don't quote me.
And you'll see me tread the boards. But on that note, it is time for us to tread to bed. After, again, this has been a long day. Thank you so much again for taking in the intermissions of the fire alarms.
You realize I'm going to cut the intermissions out. Like, they don't have to wait as long as we had to wait to do this.
It's true. Okay, never mind. Okay,
no, it's funny. Keep it in there. That's funny.
Okay. I'm going to take my cup. We'll do a final cheers. Keep going out and supporting live theater. I know it's kind of like the off season of theater now here in Toronto, but there are some wonderful projects that are coming down the line. And now Outside the March has a project coming up in August. Summer Works Festival is right around the corner as well. So tune into that. Get on into Stratford and Shaw. Yes. And before we know it, we are right back on track with everything. Great. I'm going to go drink some more Gatorade. I'm going to finish my coffee, and we'll see everyone on the third installment of Toronto Fringe 2025. But for now, good night, and we'll see you soon.